Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I hope you guys can hear me all right and that you guys are having a fantastic morning. I understand that it is early in the morning, and I accept that. As I always point out, you guys can be anywhere. And so I always appreciate that you find yourselves here. I had a few tuning issues that I wanted to get straight. Everything is now straight and we are ready to go. I have a damn good show for you today, full show for you today, but it's going to be a good one. Scott Ritter is going to be here at 7:15 a.m. Scott Ritter was a nuclear weapons inspector, if you remember. And as a nuclear weapons inspector, he is the one who is qualified to answer the question of whether or not a nuke was dropped in Syria. When I did that video, I asked that question. Basically, the evidence that has been coming out, at the very least by certain researchers, point to a yes. I spoke to Scott Ritter last night. Ritter said he doesn't believe one has been dropped, and so he will be able to give his analysis when he gets here at 7:15. I have another guest that's coming up, Esteban Carrillo. I roll my R's. I've gotten damn good. When I first met Esteban, I could not get that R roll straight. Esteban Carrillo. In the new year, rolling my R's. I could be in South American country right now, and they would not know. They was like, wow, we thought that guy was South American. Look at the way he rolls his R's. Carrillo. Reba. Yeah, I'm being a bit slightly racist now. But all things being equal, Esteban is going to be on the show. There's a lot to talk about that's taking place in Syria. Israel is stealing more land. You also have Dr. I'm going to butcher his name, but it's a doctor that effectively Israel has abducted and taken him to the rape prison, or the prison known for rapes. There is, when history look back at this moment, this image, I strongly suspect, will be iconic. And it'll be iconic for several reasons, but one of which is it would be emblematic of the level of devastation, the depravity, the racism associated with Israel and associated with the governments that supported that racist, fascist regime that is in power right now. I pointed out very early on that Israel was taking a policy of destroying the hospitals in northern Gaza. And it was obvious as to why, be it starvation or destroying the hospitals. If there are no hospitals, or if there are no people, meaning if you don't want people to be there, then why do you need hospitals? If you don't want people to be there, why do you need them to eat? If you don't want people to be there, why do you need any property there at all? You destroy it, you flatten it, you build sediments, and you put your own people in. And that's exactly what they're going to do, including building a buffer zone out. That's assuming for the moment that they don't just subsume the entire thing. I mean, after all, what's there to stop them? It seems to be the plan that's taking place in the West Bank right now. To make this that much clearer, the doctor, I must have closed that tab. His hospital was one of the last functioning hospitals in Gaza. And it was under siege, complete and utter siege. And in it being under siege, Israel effectively finally came out and made all the patients leave, not just leave, to strip. And on top of stripping, you saw people in crutches trying to go through the streets completely naked, or not naked, but basically stripped down. This includes putting the medical staff and transporting them to prison and calling doctors and nurses terrorists. Because, after all, if they're Arab, they're terrorists, right? At least according to Israeli logic. And the doctor himself came out the hospital. They shook his hand. They sent him walking down that stretch, and then they beat him with an electric cord, according to witnesses. This is the doctor we're talking about, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia. The man is a hero. He stayed there under siege, attending to his patients, fulfilling his medical obligations to those patients. And for the crime of attending to the medical needs of the Palestinians that Israel has fundamentally killed, murdered, raped in any and all forms of inhumane treatment. He stayed there and did his job. And now he's missing. And his family has been putting out requests to get him back. And you might have noticed a campaign on Twitter of doctors effectively saying, let him go. Where is he? Where have you taken and abducted him to? The prison that they've taken him to has been famous and known as a rape prison. It was one of those prisons where, because if you remember, Israel got caught raping a guy, gang raping a guy, on camera. And instead of the soldiers getting in trouble, there was no consequences. In fact, you had other soldiers go to release him. Here's some of the images coming out of the prison. And I want you to notice that some of these people, at least one, is in crutches. Because again, they took people out of hospitals. Yeah, it's disgusting. It's what they've been doing. It's what has been taking place. So yeah, I want to talk to Esteban about it. In other stories, I want to hit for a moment the Georgian prime minister, born in France, who said, I'm never going to leave. Never going to leave. That the Russians are doing everything they could to interfere with our elections. And then they asked her, hey, what evidence do you have that the Russians interfere with your elections? And she says, well, I can't necessarily prove it, but I'm very confident about it. You just feel it. This is her giving her exit speech as the new president is sworn in. The Georgian, French-born, many called a spy, working on behalf of the European Union against the interests of the country to which she was supposed to serve, can sit in her walking papers. Get the F out. Leave. Leave. Go. Go. Just go. Just go. She's on her way out. MSNBC. MSNBC. And I may hit this a little bit later, but goddamn MSNBC. So their level has reached peak desperation. Peak desperation. And I want to show a clip from them that is so infuriating. I nearly bit my tongue and fell out the chair at the same time watching the clip. As you remember, people like me have been pointing out that the issue is class and that we should focus on issues of class because your tent is widened when you're focusing on issues of class because there are going to be more workers by definition. Now, Kamala Harris didn't believe that, and many of the Democratic Party backed her in not believing that. And of course, if you're going to get $1.5 billion, it is very hard to make a class argument while accepting $1.5 billion because after all, as I keep pointing out, who are you getting the money from? Meaning the people who you're getting that money from have healthcare, they have education, they have those things. So those are not necessarily things that they need per se, in which case they're not going to give you the money for those things. It's against their interests. And so if you're going to be a Democratic Party, how on earth are you going to run an argument about class when you're getting money from people who don't need that money on those class issues? I want to play this clip. This is Simone Sanders. And listen to what she says for the moment. I want to get your take after this.
Well, and that is why I made the point yesterday about organize. I mean, people often talk about, I mean, this has literally been going on since Fred Hampton, but I mean, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Dr. King, right? Heck, Bernie Sanders talked about organizing across class as well, because the reality is when you align just along, if we're going to just specifically talk about white people for a second, okay? If we just talk about aligning just across race, we are seeing the divisions happening right now. The white billionaires, Elon Musk is not saying, yes, I'm fighting for the little guy. Yes, I'm out here, looking out for the forgotten white man. He is saying these folks are mediocre and let me get somebody else to do it, which is why folks, white, black, Latino, Native American, Asian American, and Pacific Islander and otherwise, we have to look at organizing across class, okay? Because the reality is what they said, as Michael said, what they said about black people all those years ago, and they still trying to say it about us, to be very clear. Now they're saying it out loud about people who are not black, about you, okay? First they came for us, now they're coming for you. You are not exempt, boo-boo. Let's come together.
Shut the F up. Shut the F up. Are you effing kidding me? Are you kidding me? When I and many people like me have been making that very specific argument, when, God damn it, when Bernie Sanders ran, they did any and everything in their power, meaning the weight of the political party, of the Democratic Party, did any and everything in their power to crush that movement. Meaning the thing that she's talking about is the very thing that the Democratic Party worked and fought against. And now, after losing the election, it's puts you in the mind of somebody who loses their job and then calls to pay a bill. Hey, I know I just lost my job. And I know I didn't pay this bill, for several years. But now I'm trying to get this settled and I'm trying to, make amends and get this straight. That's what I'm trying to do. Now that I've lost my job, are you out your effing mind to make that argument now, as opposed to making that argument then? Understand, Chris Matthews, on air, made the point of saying maybe we should lose this election to Donald Trump now, because if Bernie Sanders wins, he is going to take the party for a generation. That is the argument that Democrat Chris Matthews was making on air. That is not an argument that Hillary Clinton would make. Kamala Harris even was giving the left an FU by running across the country with Liz effing Cheney, Darth Vader's daughter, who has all of the same predilections as her dad. Why do you think they did that? When Chuck Schumer made the point of saying, for every lefty or progressive that we lose, we'd get another Midwest Republican. And you can replace that in state after state after state after state. How did that work for you, Chuck? How did that work for you, Chuck? It didn't work all that well considering you lost again. The reason that they're so interested in that is because of their funding mechanism. How do they make money? They go to the rich, they beg them for money. The rich don't care about your lefty priorities of healthcare, education, expansion of Social Security, increase in the minimum wage. They don't care about that. That is not what they care about. That is not their mindset. How do we make more money? How do we make more cash? That is the way they think. That is what they want. Maximization of profit. And so if you go for a Republican as opposed to a lefty, then your pressure, the pressure from your base, lessens. This notion of being tethered and dependent upon the left in your base lessens. Meaning they take this tact because for all intents and purposes, it makes it easier to get money without having the pressure of the left pushing for things in order to get the votes once they get the money. The idea that you make that argument and you got Republican Michael Steele sitting there shaking his head agreeing to any and everything that's ever said on the MSNBC, that is astonishing and outrageous. I nearly fell out of my chair. MSNBC, you are losing ratings for damn good reason. Damn good reason. And for whatever the shtick that you're now putting on because you realize, hey, Looks like we're losing people. We're losing blacks. We're losing Hispanics. Hell, 8 million people didn't show up to vote. What could we possibly be getting wrong? We already have a Republican Party. You being Republican Party light, nobody cares about. Nobody cares about. And for whatever differences, they've become so negligible that people just stay home. I mean, yeah, there are many reasons, many issues. Don't give me this nonsense that Kamala Harris ran a perfect campaign. But the issue is the brand. And for you to sit here and say that after people have been agitating and pushing and getting beat on for pushing that the Democratic Party change. And after losing the race to Donald Trump, you now have come to the assessment for now. Because in 4 years, it's not going to be that assessment. It's going to go back to normal. But you've come to the assessment, you know what? Maybe Sanders had a point. You go F yourself. You go F yourself. I want to bring in my guests. We are joined with the one and only Scott Ritter, man of the hour. Happy New Year, Scott. How you doing this morning, man? You doing all right?
I'm doing okay. Thanks. Yourself? Happy New Year to you, too.
All right. Let's get this break first. There we are. Yeah, I'm doing good, man, and I'm happy to join you. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons mass destruction whistleblower, which is one of the reasons that I really wanted you on today. Scott, I have about two or three questions, if I can get them in. The first one, was a nuke dropped in Syria? And the reason why I asked this is because there were certain researchers who were pointing out seismic activity and an increase in radioactive activity. At the same time, Israel just so happened to drop that weapon in Syria. It was a terrifying explosion associated with that weapon. You would know. You're the man who investigated this stuff for a living. Give me your verdict.
The answer is no. No, a nuclear weapon wasn't used at all. First of all, if you understood anything about Israel's nuclear weapons program and their policy, and its relationship with the United States, it would be an act of suicide for Israel to use a nuclear weapon, because it would confront the United States with the fact that Israel is a nuclear power publicly. And the United States would have to take certain legal measures towards Israel. This is why back in the late 1960s, Richard M. Nixon and Golda Meir worked out this whole notion of, deniability. And there are measures that Israel has agreed to take that would lead up to a decision to reveal publicly its nuclear weapons capability. None of those measures were taken. So in order to accept this, you just have to accept the fact that Israel, out of the blue, for no reason, decided to drop a nuclear weapon. Why would Israel use a nuclear weapon on a target in Syria? Why? There's no reason, none whatsoever. It's not an existential threat. They were eliminating what was, by every admission, an underground ammunition storage facility. The reason why you saw such a big explosion was that all the ammunition went up at one time, the giant explosion. But it's not a nuclear explosion. So first of all, just from the logical perspective, no. Second of all, we have sensors all over the place that are designed to detect, the use of a nuclear weapon. None of those sensors were activated. This wasn't a nuclear weapon. The radiation that's being detected is not the kind that you would expect to see with the use of a nuclear weapon. The seismic activity, I know there's people out there saying that that it showed certain characteristics, etc. It
Right.
showed the characteristics of an ammunition dump being blown up. There was no nuclear explosion that would have been detected by satellites that are designed to detect just that. And the radiation is unique to a nuclear explosion. In short, the answer is not just no, but excuse my language, hell no.
Hell no.
It's a ridiculous assertion. It makes no sense. It passes no logic. It's just put out there. Look, I'm as anti-Israel as as one can be. I don't support their policies, etc. But I'm also somebody who's fact-based, and the facts just don't align on this one. I don't mean any disrespect for the people who have put out, their analysis of this, but no, the nuclear weapon was not used by Israel against a target in Syria.
Fair enough. I accept that. I mean, you would know better than I would. I think the reason why people will come to that assessment is not so much that they hate Israel. I think up to this point, they've acted with impunity. And any and everything that they've done up to this point, the U.S. has effectively backed or co-signed. For example, if you look at Blinken, if you look at Kirby, Sullivan, all of these people have basically said, nothing to see here, folks, is no genocide. And even when the U.S. puts out their own statements about starvation, the U.S. tamps it down. Hell, we just got the report that the BBC was literally changing or softening their reporting in order to shape it, in order to not make Israel look bad. And so, in a world like that, where reality is fundamentally denied, then yeah, people may come to certain assessments based on their own, let's say, expertise that may not necessarily be up to snuff. That, yeah, this may happen, and no, there won't be consequences for it when it does happen. But I take your point. I do take your point. That this wasn't necessarily a nuke. This was just an explosion based on the bombs on the ground that they were blowing up. Fair enough. The other question that I wanted to get to.
Let me just throw in one last thing on that.
Please do.
At a time when, Israel has indicated to the United States that Iran's nuclear program is of an existential nature to Israel, and that they want that program eliminated. The last thing Israel would do when the United States appears to be focused on, with the incoming Trump administration, showing that it's ready to enter into negotiations with Iran, who appears to be ready to enter into the same negotiations to bring the Iranian nuclear program within parameters acceptable by both Israel and the United States. The last thing Israel would do is use a nuclear weapon that would legitimize an Iranian nuclear weapons program.
I see.
So there's just so many logical things out there. When people start throwing data out there, I've seen radiation spikes and all this stuff. All I have in front of me is a piece of paper. What I'd really like to do is have the actual data itself, to see the sensors and all this kind of stuff. And then because I am not, and I'll just repeat this, I am not a nuclear, physicist. You are not looking at a nuclear scientist here. This is a Marine. But the thing that made me effective when I was in the United Nations is that I had the ability to reach out and touch the best people in the world. The genuine rocket scientists, nuclear weapons designers, and all this kind of stuff, and bring them in and say, "Hey, here's the data. What does it mean?" And they would look at it and tell me what it means. I would like to be able to do that, but I'm not in a position to do that as a private citizen. So even though I come at this with a very strong assertion, I haven't run the numbers. I haven't seen the original data, and so I don't want to denigrate those people who have done the work. But I'm just saying, from a logic standpoint, and from the things that should have been triggered, there are things that should have happened had Israel done this. Things that would have, the detection capabilities that would have, sent alarm bells ringing, and none of those went off. What we're getting is an indirect analysis of this by peripheral observers, not the principles. There's the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty has a series of primary and auxiliary seismic stations that are designed to detect nuclear explosions. None of these were triggered. There's radiation detection systems throughout the region. None of these were triggered. There's overhead detection capabilities. None of these were triggered. And so I'd like to see the data, and then what I'd really like to do is take that data and put it before, the genuine experts and say, hey, tell me what this means. Tell me,
Yeah,
what this means. So I'm just what I'm trying to do is make sure your audience knows that that I'm not trying to be something that I'm not. I'm not pretending to be the guy that can look at nucleoid detection and read meaning into it. I'm an outside observer that has some background in this. And what I would have expected to happen hasn't happened had a nuclear weapons test been done. It doesn't pass any of the logic as to why Israel would use a nuclear weapon. But out of respect for the people that have written these papers, I would say that before I make an absolute definitive analysis, those numbers should be, the data that they have should be run through expert eyes for final confirmation of what I'm saying. Or if somebody's saying, "No, Scott, you might be wrong here. There's a little glitch here," then you have to relook at it, because an argument could be made that Israel did a demonstration. One of the things that they talk about with Golda Meir is a demonstration of capability that's designed to deter whatever activity that Israel doesn't want to happen. And did Israel demonstrate a capability to both the United States and Iran in an effort to push them towards? I'm just brainstorming here. This is all extreme. On the extreme, it doesn't make sense for Israel to have done that. But these are counter arguments that people could put out there to my assessment. So again, what I'm trying to emphasize is that I'm a guy looking at it from a desk in Del Mar, New York, thousands of miles removed from the issue. And even though I'm confident in my assessment, I don't want people to think that that I have the bat phone that I can pick up and call somebody and get the definitive answer.
No, man, I appreciate it. I mean, look, your expertise. Don't undercut yourself in this. Your expertise. You did this for a living, as opposed to us who are looking at it from below. So no, I appreciate your assessment on this. I still want to stay in Syria for a bit. So there was a question of whether or not the Russian military bases were going to remain in Syria. And there was a lot of speculation that they were going to leave, they're going to move to Libya, or at the very least, they were going to move to another location because it was unsafe. Now that effectively jihadist terrorists have taken over the country and knocked the country over. Basically, the old Syria is no longer in existence. But Jelani, in a recent interview, pointed out that he wanted the bases to stay there, at the very least for the time being. Now, the language that he cut for this made it clear that this was, we don't want them to leave in a way that will adversely affect Syria. But, there was this kind of connotation that we may want them to leave at some point. Now, Western powers have been pushing to kick Russia out of Syria. Jelani's point is, well, I can't do that. We effectively need them to stay in Syria. Some reports have come out, though, that the US and the UK were pushing terrorist groups to attack the Russian bases. Again, just a pressure campaign, considering that they were instrumental in getting Jelani in power. Give me your take on this. I mean, for one, Jelani has now said this is going to be a caretaker government, no longer a transitional government. But give me your take on the Russia remaining in Syria, and do you think this is something sustainable?
Well, first of all, we have to understand the roots and origins of the Russian involvement in Syria. While there was, during the Cold War, Russia had a military presence in Syria. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, that presence, stopped being of a permanent nature and became more of a Russian ship would visit on occasion, etc. In 2015, when Russia agreed to intervene in Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad, the Russian Air Force and Russian ground forces, came into Syria, but this was a force of intervention, not invasion. They didn't invade Syria. They didn't occupy Syria. They were there at the invitation of the government to intervene on behalf of the government against forces like HTS and such. The Russians do have deep cultural ties with Syria because of the Cold War. A lot of Syrians traveled to Russia for study. A lot of Russians traveled to Syria. A lot of intermarriages. There's a whole bunch of Syrian Russian families out there, and it means that Russia is tied to Syria in more than just geopolitics. There is sort of a soul-felt connection with Syria. So now you're Jolani, and you've achieved something that you weren't prepared to achieve. You went from I'm launching an attack to sever the M4 highway so that we might be in a position to threaten the Syrian positions in Aleppo to I'm suddenly running Syria because Bashar al-Assad disappeared and his army refused to fight. And now you have to deal with this problem. And it's a huge problem, one that is looking like it's transitioning towards civil war. So now you're it. You're the one. The buck stops there. Harry Truman's, the buck stops here sign is on Jolani's desk. How do you solve this problem? The West isn't there to help you. They've all come in and lined up with you, but have they lifted the Caesar sanctions? Have they start pouring in assistance? No. And Turkey doesn't really know how to handle you either. Because this creates a problem. This vacuum, has created a problem for Turkey as well. Jolani needs stability, and the Russian presence in Syria is a stabilizing force. The Russians have this relationship, especially with the Alawites. The Russian air base and port are in the Alawite section, Latakia. And as Jolani looks at the potential of an Alawite uprising, pushback against the HTS, coming to power. I think he's looking at Russia saying, "You don't leave yet. You're like that calming influence. When you have a dog that barks and that person walks in the room and the dog calms down, you're like, hey, stay in the room. Dogs calm down. I need you to stay here for a while." And I think that's where Jolani is right now with Russia, trying to find a balance between this Russian force of intervention, which Jolani no longer is a use for. There's no reason for the Russian army to run around and bomb things anymore because Jolani was the target that the Russians were bombing. In the same thing with the Russian military on the ground, there's no reason for the military to be out there to support the Syrian army, which has disappeared, effort to fight Jolani. But on the other hand, if the Russians leave, that dog's going to start barking again. And the Jolani doesn't want that. So I think right now there's this discussion taking place. Now the Russians have to decide, what advantages do they accrue by remaining in Syria? It's an exposed position now. And it does set them up to having, if things go south, they don't have the Syrian army to back them up. They don't have Hezbollah as their ally or Iran as their ally. They're pretty much on their own, and it's a very vulnerable state of affairs for the Russians. And so I think the Russians and Jolani right now are sort of doing this dance of what do we want this to look like? What is the mission going to be? How is this mission going to take place? The Russians are saying that these bases could be used for delivering humanitarian goods, which fits into the notion of Russia being a force of stability for whatever post-Assad Syria ends up looking like. So I think that's where we're at right now, with both sides trying to figure out what exactly they want to happen. Both sides agreeing that Russia could be a very positive influence, but then the question is, how do you make this happen that doesn't put Russia at risk? What happens, for instance, if Russia agrees to stay and then the Alawites rise up against Jolani and declare that Latakia now is a HTS-free zone, its own independent state? Does Russia now side with the Alawites, who were the former Assadists who invited them in? Or does Russia honor whatever agreement they have with Jolani to either remain neutral or move it? It's a tricky thing. And so I think there's a lot of diplomacy that's at play here right now, that we're not. I think when you look at what the Russians and Jolani are doing right now, it's like watching a duck on a pond. And the duck's just sort of floating on the water serenely, and you're like, man, what a peaceful. Go under that water, and you see those feet doing this, And I think that's what's happening right now with the Russians and Jolani. Is it's looking serene on the top, but underneath there's the feet just flapping around, trying to figure out what the heck we're going to do and how we maintain this thing to be stable.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it sounds like you consider this to be a crisis, which I do too. I was reading one of your tweets yesterday, and you pointed out, you said this post, in fact, I'd show it just so the audience can see what I'm talking about, because I want to get your take on it. I want to get your thought process in it, because I agree with you, by the way. It says, this post may anger many. I don't care if you're a Muslim and you support what is going on in Syria today. You only prove that others are saying about your religion that a faith born of violence and intolerance. Now, I personally believe that Islam is founded on principles of peace and tolerance, which is, in my mind, tells me that those so-called Muslims who cheer what is happening in Syria today are in fact anything but Muslims. They are unbelievers, kafir, and should be treated by the Islamic world as such. And you put on apostates who should be eradicated with extreme prejudice, and the non-Muslims who should line up to help in this extermination. Syria is about to be turned into hell on earth, all because we fooled ourselves into believing that an Al-Qaeda terrorist named Jilani could be reformed. You can't reform evil. Unpack that for me and for the audience to give your take on this, because I've seen these people celebrating what I consider to be an outright disaster for the local communities that are there. I mean, the West is scrubbing those videos of people being beaten, killed, heads chopped off, dragged through the streets. And they've fundamentally scrubbed that stuff from mainstream media and have just talked about this as democracy, that they put a terrorist in and called it a democracy. It's astonishing. Unpack that post for me and for the audience.
Now, let's start off with the premise that there are a lot of people who oppose the regime of Bashar al-Assad for legitimate reasons. People who had legitimate grievances against Bashar al-Assad, both dating back to the policies that were enacted by his father, Hafez al-Assad, and by policies that were enacted during the time that Bashar al-Assad was in power. So I'm not saying that if you oppose Assad and you are seeking to remove him from power, that you are, non-believers. It's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying, though, is the Muslim world has been struggling for some time now to convince the non-Muslim world that it is not a religion of terrorism and violence, that Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, HTS, ISIS, that these are not real Muslim movements, that these are movements by people who have perverted the cause of Islam, taken the cause of Islam and perverted it, that is not Islam. Okay, you convinced me. I've met with many imams, and they convinced me that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, HTS, and all this, that's evil. That's not Islam. Those are non-believers. Those are guys who have perverted Islam. You guys convinced me. So why the hell are you cheering now that they came into power? You see what I'm saying here? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can be against Assad and cheer his demise. Now, if you're Palestinian, you're doing that, you might as well just slit your own throat, because Assad was that which enabled the axis of resistance to support Hamas, to support the creation of a Palestinian state. So if you're cheering, Assad's demise, you're sort of cheering your own demise. And I've pointed that out too, but this is separate. This is about people who say they're Muslims. And I went down to Tampa, Florida, and I met with, anti-Assad Syrians who were all about the piety of Islam, and swearing to me that they would never let harm come to a Christian, that they would fight and die. Then why are you still in Florida? If you tell me you would never let harm come to a Christian, why aren't you in Syria right now defending the Christians against HTS, Al-Qaeda, this terroristic mentality? Jolani can't be reformed. What you need to understand is Jolani, like all of the people before, have been a tool of the United States. We helped create Al-Qaeda. We helped create ISIS. We, did it directly, indirectly, by facilitating their development, their rise, by creating the conditions that allowed them to become manifest, because we viewed them as a tool to, achieve certain outcomes, including the overthrow of Assad. But that's America. We screw things up every time we do something, especially in the Muslim world. But if you're a true believer, if you're telling me that you believe that this is what you believe that Islam is not defined by Al Qaeda, then why are you cheering Al Qaeda on? And don't tell me it's because you're anti-Assad, because that has nothing to do with your damn faith. If you're telling me you're a person of faith, then stop bringing in politics, pal. Okay, don't tell me that this is justified because Assad's gone, because Assad was a bad guy. No, you're a man of faith. You say that you believe Islam is not that, but it is that as being manifested, and you're cheering it, which tells me that secretly inside, in places inside your heart that you don't want anybody to peer into, that's really how you view Islam. That if it's okay for HTS to line the Christians up and execute them, to desecrate the holy spots, to attack the shrine of a imam who's sacred to the Alawite cause. I know if you're a Sunni, you say, hey, those aren't real Muslims, therefore, we should. But there are fatwas put out there by the Shia Islamic community. And again, now if you're a Sunni saying the Shia aren't real Muslims, then I have a problem with you, because that's like me as a Protestant saying the Catholics aren't real Christians. I don't have to buy into Catholic dogma. I don't have to, believe in the saints and all this stuff. But no way I could get away by saying the Catholics aren't Christians. They believe in Christianity. They just practice it different than I do. That doesn't make them evil. It just means they have taken a different path. Just like I wouldn't accept Catholics calling me evil for being a Presbyterian. If you're Sunni and Shia, yes, you guys have some, dogmatic issues. But to pretend to say that the Shia aren't Muslims and that therefore Shia clerics are incapable of issuing fatwas or religious decrees that recognize the Alawites, which is a spin-off of Shiism, as a Muslim. You don't get to make that damn call. I mean, that's the thing. Then, and yet this is what's happening here. We have a whole bunch of Sunni Muslims who say that the Alawites aren't Muslim, therefore anything can happen to them. So what they do is they make them crawl on the ground and bark like dogs before they cut their heads off. They burn their shrines. They attack the shrines that are sacred to the Shia faith, such as there's a mosque outside of Damascus, to Saida. You can't be Muslim and tolerate this. You can't be Muslim. You can't be the Muslim that the Islamic community convinced me exists, a religion of peace and tolerance that condemns these actions. You can't be part of that community and then tolerate what's happening in Syria right now because it's politics. No, that means that your faith is corrupted. And this is the point I'm trying to make. If you say you're a Muslim, I'm a Muslim, and I'm a man of peace, and I have rejected Al Qaeda. I've rejected Al Qaeda. But now I'm applauding Al Qaeda. Then you are not a Muslim. You're not a true believer. You're kafir. This is my point I'm trying to make. And I'm confronting this community of Muslims, American Muslims, who claim to be pious people of peace, and yet they tolerate this taking place. And they tolerate it by saying it's not happening. It's not happening. It's not really happening. It's some extremists, some rogue element. No, guys, Al Qaeda is Al Qaeda. You can't reform Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is a head-chopping perversion of Islam. You convinced me of that. You guys succeeded. You spent a lot of time convincing me that I shouldn't run down and kill every Muslim I meet because they attacked me on 9/11. You convinced me that what occurred on 9/11 isn't real Islam. That's a perversion of Islam, that the Wahhabists and Salafists and those of that ilk don't condemn everybody else for their actions. You convinced me, you won me over. I'm on your side. I'm defending you. And then you cheer when these people take over in Syria and start chopping off heads, burning people. I remember Jolani's the guy that burned, a Jordanian pilot alive. There's a videotape of it. That's who he really is. Mm-hmm. Jolani's the guy that organizes the mass beheadings of people, the mass executions, the kidnapping and rape of Yazidi women. This is Jolani. This is who he is. He can't be reformed. That's who he is at his heart. Right now, he's in a position where he's they've dressed him up in a coat and tie, but the organization he represents is slaughtering Christians, slaughtering Druze, slaughtering Alawites as we speak. He's appointing, his own organization now to impose Sharia law. Now, Sharia law is Islamic law, and I guess every true Muslim wants to live under Sharia law. But the Sharia law that he's talking about putting in is extreme version of Sharia law that has no tolerance. And if you're a Muslim and you're saying that's okay, then you're telling me that Islam is not a religion of peace and tolerance, that Islam is what all the haters were saying from the start, a religion of violence and intolerance, that what happened on 9/11 wasn't an anomaly, but the norm. And that's why I'm calling it out, because it needs to be called out, not because I'm pro-Assad or whatever. Look, Assad was what he was, and he disappeared. I to this day, if I met him and I interviewed him, I would say I condemn you as a coward. You were the president of your nation, and you ran away, leaving your nation, to be ravaged. You should have taken up an AK-47. You should have surrounded yourself with your last followers, and you should have died launching a counterattack against these people. That's what the president of Syria should have done. Died a martyr's death, leading a charge in defense of that which he claimed he believed in. But he ran away in the middle of the night, leaving his country exposed to this. So no, I'm not going to sit here and defend Bashar al-Assad. And the more that comes out, the Russians are now starting to talk about apparently what they knew all along, that Assad, in winning the war against HTS and others, he basically made himself unable to govern, that he wasn't able to adapt from wartime to peacetime and make the changes in society necessary to win the confidence of the Syrian people. And at the end, he was so isolated that the army wasn't willing to fight for him, and the people weren't willing to stand up for him. So he was a failure as a leader. And then if people want to talk about the brutality of the Assad regime, you can throw that in there too as well. Arrest him, put him on trial, hold him accountable. But none of what Assad did justifies what's being done in the name of Islam today inside Syria, which is the desecration of Christianity, the desecration of the Shia mosques, the humiliation of the Alawites. No, that's unacceptable, intolerable. And if you're doing it as a Muslim, you're either telling me that's what true Islam is, or you're kafir, a non-believer. You can't be both.
They put him in a suit, and they said it was a phase in his 20s, and so they say it's okay now. I agree with everything that came out of your mouth. It's astonishing what they're okay with and allowing the people to do. They always say the person is a bad guy, so anything that happens is fair game, despite the fact that this stuff is happening to the population, not to the person. So no, Scott, I 1000% agree with you, man. I want to go to Russia for a bit. So apparently they have taken over Karahovo, or at the very least liberated Karahovo, depending upon your point of view. They're raising the flag, the Russian flag, over this building. And I have to admit, it gives you this, there's this famous image of waving up the flag over the Berlin, once they took Berlin. It was like this just iconic thing. And you can imagine the level of pride and everything else associated with doing so. It evokes that. Where are we in this conflict? It seems that Ukraine is getting weaker. It seems that their capability to resist is getting far weaker, meaning they're losing territory faster than they were before. They're losing men faster than they were before. Where do we stand on the battlefield? And after that, I want to get to Bucha, because you have been very strong on that. You've been pushing back on that more so than anybody else when everyone else was claiming it was a massacre. But I want to get to current battle position first.
Well, Jamal, you and I have been having conversations for some time now, and I have been talking about military math and correlation of forces and war of attrition. Now, I admit that I was far more optimistic about how quickly the situation that we're experiencing in Ukraine right now. I anticipated this would happen, earlier in the year. That I didn't see the Ukrainians holding on as much, but
they've clung.
because
I've been shocked. Yeah.
Yeah, but the Russian command, the thing about an analyst is we don't have a crystal ball. Our job is to take a look at the data we have available to us. And from a military math standpoint, I'm right. This collapse should have taken place a long time ago. But human life isn't just about mathematical equations. You have to throw in the things such as how hard a man will fight, in how what a person is willing to do in support of a cause. The Russian commanders that I've spoken to, the Russian correspondents that work on the front line, have all come back with the same thing. They too are shocked by how hard the Ukrainians are fighting, that they never expected Ukraine to fight this hard. The Ukrainian soldiers just won't surrender. I mean, a handful of them do, especially the ones who were. You know what you don't see a lot of? You see a lot of Ukrainian soldiers interviewed, when were you, when did you become a soldier? Well, I was taken off the streets a month ago. I wasn't given very little training. I was thrown into the front line and I decided to surrender rather than die.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you don't see? I've been a soldier since 2014. I'm a professional. I was surrounded and I decided to give up. You don't see anybody saying that. Why?
Yeah.
Because they don't give up. Because they fight, they die, they make the Russians dig them out. They don't yield anything easily. And this has shocked the Russians because this means that every village, every tree line, every bunker is a fight to the death. A fight to the death. And this slows things down. It complicates things. And this is why the pace of advance has been so slow. But the one thing it also does is it increases the casualties. Right now, there is, even amongst certain Western outlets, I think ABC News, through the number 1.1 million Ukrainian dead. Why? Because they're not surrendering, because they're forcing the Russians to dig them out. But when you have 1.1 million dead in a military that started off at around 900,000, including reserves. And you still have an army in the field now that probably numbers around 700,000. You've destroyed a huge amount of manpower, and there's no manpower to replace it right now. And that's the problem. The Russians have significant manpower reserves that can continue to draw upon, and they have everything that we talked about before: the military math, the war of attrition, the numbers. That which I had anticipated would take place earlier this year is taking place now. And you're seeing the collapse done. It dragged out because the West kept pouring resources into this, into Ukraine, and the Ukrainian soldier has just shown himself to be tenacious and willing to die before he gives up that basement or that tree line or this piece of territory. But if you're willing to die, then the Russians are willing to give you that opportunity, and they've given that opportunity to 1.1 million, and there's nobody to replace them. And you're starting to see this, and you're going to see more and more images as the Russians put forward of the Russian flag going up in an effort to, repeat that iconic moment that you spoke about on the Reichstag in May of 1945.
Mm-hmm. Last question, Bucha. So initially there was reports that there was this massive massacre that took place in Bucha. And you pointed out, well, the Ukrainians were there. Why are they immediately blaming the Russians for something that the Ukrainians clearly were there for? Give me your take on this. I mean, I was fascinated by the reporting on this because the West was, anything Ukraine says, they go with. Zelensky, we've lost 30,000 people. And the West, well, Zelensky said they lost 30,000 people. Give me a take on what is taking place in Bucha. Apparently there's new reporting on this.
Well, I think the reporting right now comes out of a trial that's taking place in the Czech Republic of a mercenary who was attached to a Ukrainian nationalist formation that moved into Bucha after the Russians left and committed mass murder of Russian sympathizers amongst the Ukrainian population. Because that's what, there's two Bucha massacres, if you want to call it. One is the Russian suppression of resistance among the civilian population. And understand this, that if you're civilian and you're using your cell phone to collect information about Russian military positions, and you take that cell phone data and you send it to Ukrainian artillery that then fires on the Russians and kills Russians, and the Russians capture you, you're going to be executed. You don't have any rights. You're not a combatant. And you will be executed. When the Russians came in, and it was interesting, there was a news report that came out about the Bucha massacre, and I'm sitting there listening, and the head of the Ukrainian intelligence said, yes, we were in contact with all these Ukrainian civilians out there who were feeding us this information. And I'm like, okay, and then when they get captured and they get executed by the Russians, you're calling it a war crime, but it's not. The war crime is the civilian who's supposed to be a protected class becoming an unlawful combatant by using their phone to gather intelligence. They become spies, and we know what happens to spies in times of wartime. There is a summary trial, and they are summarily executed. And so there was a lot of this taking place. And CBS News and ABC News and Frontline and everybody else went and got videos of the Russians bringing in civilian men into a room for interrogation, then taking them out and shooting them, saying that's the Bucha massacre. No. That's war. And that's the ugly reality. The other thing about war is that people die. Civilians get caught in the crossfire all the time. So, the bicyclist who is bicycling right in the middle of a war zone and takes a main tank round, that's not the Bucha massacre either. And yet they've shown that image and saying, see, that's the Russians killing innocent civilians. No, that's innocent civilians being caught up in very brutal fighting. The Bucha massacre occurred when, after the Russians withdrew, there was a portion of the population that had been collaborating with the Russians. And you'll find this throughout Ukraine, where you have Russian speakers who have ties to Russia that date back to Soviet times. Maybe they don't support the Ukrainian nationalist government. And when the Russians came in, they were the ones who were selling eggs and selling goods to the Russians, etc. They were the ones who were hungry, and the Russians gave them the Russian military food packs. The Russians left, and these guys put white armbands on their arms, telling the Russians, hey, we're on your side. And they started moving towards the Russian positions to fall back with the Russians. When the Ukrainian forces came in, if you notice, the first thing that the mayor of Bucha came out and said is, things are normal. We've taken over, and things are returning. He made no mention of a massacre. But that night, a Ukrainian politician came on her social media website and told people, stay indoors. You're going to hear shooting. Don't worry about it. It's our security forces who are coming in to cleanse. And then the security forces put out the Safari unit put out their own website that said, no, we're actively cleansing collaborators and saboteurs. Cleansing means kill. And so they admit it. There's a video that shows one of these people called the boatsman, and it's people saying, hey, they don't have our side. Can we shoot them? Shoot them, shoot them, shoot them. This is what the Bucha massacre was. This was Ukrainian forces coming in and cleansing Bucha of the element of the population that were sympathetic to the Russians. And they shot them as they were trying to run towards the Russian position. They found them, they bound them, they executed them, they shot them. So that took place. Now, right at the same time this is happening, Boris Johnson in the West is flying into Kiev to convince Zelensky not to sign on to what's known as the Istanbul Communique, the peace agreement that had been initialed and ready to implement. Now, they had a problem though, but how do you explain why? The Russians, this withdrawal that the Russians were doing wasn't because the Ukrainian forces defeated them. The Russians were withdrawing as a good faith measure linked to the Istanbul Communique, saying, we promise you we're not here for territorial acquisition. To prove that, we're going to withdraw our forces from around Kiev, and we'll begin, withdrawing our forces from other places in Ukraine as well, so that you can see that we're negotiating in good faith. what they decided to do is to spin it as a Russian defeat, but you need to, people would say, hey, we could have peace. You need to convince them that there can't be peace. So you create an atrocity. So what happened is everybody rolled into they brought in the Western media, they brought in the Ukrainian media, they brought in all the war tourists and invented the Bucha massacre, showing these images and saying that this was the Russians gunning these people down. There is no evidence whatsoever that as Russia retreated, it gunned down anybody. All of the evidence that's available shows that these people that were killed by Ukrainian security forces as part of a cleansing operation. And this was known up front. I wrote this at the same time the world was talking about the Bucha massacre because the evidence was clear. They weren't, because remember, before they decided to make this a Russian massacre, they were bragging about cleansing. They were bragging about what they were doing. And this is the Ukrainians that talk about other areas where they came in. You have one senior Ukrainian official laughing on camera that they're going to have to do a census when this is over to find out who's alive because they've killed everybody. We just take them, we shoot them, and we throw them down the hill. All the civilians, teachers, when the Russians came in and occupied the Kharkov area around Kharkov, there were schools. And the students need to go to school. But the Russians said, if you're going to have classes in our territory, the teachers have to be trained to Russian standards. So they took these teachers into Russia, trained them up on Russian standards, brought them back into schools. When the Ukrainian forces counterattacked, they took these teachers and said, did you go to Russia for retraining? Well, we had to. We were occupied. We were told, no, you're a traitor. Pop, killed them. This is what the Ukrainians do. They're mass murdering neo-Nazis, and that's what the Bucha massacre was. And the truth is now coming out. I mean, the truth was always there, but the West was spinning it. But now it's coming out in a way that can't be denied. Yeah.
Man, Scott, thank you for this in general, but thank you for that explanation. Because again, you're absolutely right. They use that to basically say, well, we can't negotiate with the Russians. We have to, and they went with that whole thing about we can't negotiate, we can't come to a deal, the Istanbul Agreement is off, etc. And hundreds of thousands up to 1 million people dead later. Here we are. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons mass destruction whistleblower. You can find Scott on Telegram at Scott Ritter. Scott, you're also on Twitter at this point. So you're back on it. So we can also find you at Real Scott Ritter on Twitter. Thank you, my man. You have a fantastic year.
I like that.
I know, right? Must have did something right.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, man. You have a good one. Be safe.
Thanks.
All right. That was a fantastic explanation by Scott. We're going to keep this boat rolling. Esteban Carrillo. He is in Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist and current editor for The Cradle. Previously with Telesur English and one of my favorite people to talk to. How you doing, Esteban? You doing okay today?
Hi, Jamal. Yeah, I'm doing good. Glad to be on the show.
Oh, man, glad to have you. I'm sorry for the delay. I got my timing slightly off, but thank you for joining me. I have to start with what is taking place, oddly enough, in Gaza, northern Gaza. Mm-hmm. So the family of Dr., and I want to get his name right because I always butcher it when I say it. Mm-hmm. But this picture, I pointed out, is going to be iconic at some point, just for the barbarity that created it. Yeah, it should be. Honestly, it should be. Many of these images should be iconic at this point. But Dr. Saif, I believe, but I want to get it right. Give me 1 second to get it so I can see directly what that name is. But I was pointing out earlier today that this doctor stayed at the hospital while it was
Abu Safia.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Abu Safia, yeah.
And it was Kamal Adwan Hospital. Mm-hmm. He stayed there while it was under siege, attending to his patients. And at a certain point, when the hospital was finally under siege, there was nothing else they could do. The people were pulled out, including patients. They were stripped. They were marched at the end of the bayonet with tanks all around. And eventually, when he got to the doctor's turn, they pulled him out. They shook his hand. They sent him walking in that image that I just showed, and they beat him with an electrical cord, according to the witnesses that were on the ground.
Exactly.
Astonishing barbarity. And it seems like they were doing it purely out of spite that he stayed there, fought that long. And by fight, I don't mean he picked up a gun. I just mean he stayed there and attended to his patients while this organization around him with all of the force that they had mustered. And they sent him to the prison that is infamous for rapes.
Yes. Not just for rapes, for extrajudicial killings. This is the same prison where Dr. Adnan al-Bursh was tortured to death. You know, this prominent Palestinian surgeon from Al-Shifa Hospital months ago. Jamal, this has been going for more than a year at this point. You know, these atrocities are on the daily. These images are absolutely nothing new in Gaza, and I think that this is, you know, a big problem, because when you say this is an iconic image, this should be an iconic image, you're completely correct. This should be the cover of every single newspaper, of every single magazine, of every single website. Should be talking about this, about how a hospital, the last functioning hospital in the north of Gaza, where tens of thousands of people still remain, has been burned to cinders, has been destroyed completely, right? After weeks of harassment, of attacks, of Israeli army using drones, using robots, using armored robots that they were blowing up, right? They were making these because remember, at this point, Israel has all of the technology of the Western world available at its fingertips, not just in terms of intelligence gathering, but also in weaponry, right? So we have seen that they are using armed quadcopters to shoot children in the chest, you know, double tap them, as they like to say, once in the chest, once in the head. Where have you seen this technology used before? Where have you ever before Gaza seen armed quadcopters shooting at people? Before this started happening in Gaza, I didn't even know that was possible. I had absolutely no clue. Now it's a common occurrence. So now you also have these booby-trapped robots that are going to the doors of the hospital, that are going to the windows of the hospital and blowing up. You have these drones throwing grenades. You have snipers positioned around the hospital, shooting at anything that moves. And through all of these, through the artillery shelling and the airstrikes, Kamal Arwan Hospital was still functioning. To what degree? To how were doctors operating inside? How were they treating patients? Only they can know this. Only they can know the true calamity. Yes, this is Dr. Hassam Abu Asifa, who was giving statements almost on the daily. He was, you know, thankfully there was still internet connection in the north of Gaza, or at the very least they were able to pass these videos along to be posted. And he was giving these accounts day in and day out, talking about the hundreds of patients who remain. Because again, the Israeli army gives these evacuation orders, right, which is also such a misnomer. It's such a you know, not how can we call it an evacuation order? That makes it sound like it's some sort of benign command, right? Like, oh, we want to get you out of the war zone. It's not that. We want to get you into the kill zone, right? We want to get you out of the building and into the kill zone. The video you just posted, right? These were medical staff and patients who were told to strip half naked and walk out in the middle of winter. In the middle of winter in Gaza, to walk out. At the same time, we know that any Gazan, any Palestinian that is trying to cross from the north to the south of the strip, they have to go through the Netzarim corridor, right? This is an area that the Israeli military has established to keep control. And they are shot at, right? A few weeks ago, Haaretz came out with this report in which Israeli reservists were talking about the line of corpses, as they like to call it. The line of corpses is this imaginary line before the Netzarim corridor in which everyone coming from the north to the south gets shot, gets killed, with absolutely no explanation, no reason, no need, to even say anymore that they are terrorists, because the moment a Palestinian in Gaza drops dead, he's already a terrorist. It doesn't matter if he's a newborn baby that froze in the cold. It doesn't matter if he's the head of a hospital that is treating people that are trying to survive a Holocaust. It doesn't matter. They're all terrorists. And again, just to wrap up what you just said, he's taken the director of this hospital, a man who should be, Donald Trump is listed as person of the year, by Time magazine. As first of all, that's a label that matters anymore when you've seen the list of people that have been named. But second of all, it just shows you this disconnect that exists when a man that is giving everything that he has to help people survive a Holocaust is taken to a detention facility in which most Palestinians do not survive. And as you said, infamous, not just for sexual assault, but for systemic torture, for starvation, for the violation of every single human right, international convention, etc. What justifies this? What makes the head of surgery at Al-Shifa Hospital, who died in this prison, what made him a terrorist? The fact that he's a Palestinian. It's as simple as that.
They're heroes. And, in many respects, the truth of the matter is just because you do good things doesn't mean good things happen to you. And if you think over history,
especially
all things being equal, especially in Gaza. But I guess my thing is not just in Gaza, in general. I mean, if you think of some of the best people in history, those people became some of the best people because they were tortured and maligned and ostracized by some kind of power structure that they were effectively standing against. That man is going to be in the history books with all of them, and he deserves to be. I can't imagine the strain and the stress with you seeing people die around you that you, under normal circumstances, with the most basic of medical attention, could do something about. And yet you don't get that attention. And you are screaming to the world saying, help us. We're human beings. How can you ignore our humanity in this way as you support this genocidal regime?
Exactly.
And there is no response from the world as it happened. It is hard to wrap my head around that. It is hard to wrap my head around what he went through, what his patients went through, and the strength required to stand there and continue to do that job day in and day out. When the Israelis first saw him, they mocked him for not changing his clothes for 5 days. That was one of the first things they said to him, basically joking him for being not able to clean himself. And it's like that shows the depravity of all this, right?
Exactly.
You have right now.
Yeah, him walking to the tanks, right? Him walking head first into the tanks. This is the level of courage that in the Zionist entity, it's simply not even understood. There's not a level. There's not a person on the side that is committing a genocide that that has as much courage as Dr. Hossam Abu Sifa has in the tip of his finger.
That's right.
To confront this genocidal army head on.
They stay in their tanks. They stay in their barracks. When they went into Lebanon, they got their ass kicked when they had to actually fight. It's just disgusting. That story bugged me to no end. I look, under normal circumstances, I'm not a big fan of doctors, but I am a big fan of this idea of this kind of philosophical responsibility, like this notion that I give an example. It's a horrible example because it's Star Trek, but it works. There was an episode where the captain needed to do something. And in order to do it, he realized that it was going to be just exceptional pain involved. Like in the future, this was going to come back to bite him. He knew it was going to come back to bite him. And he recoiled in fear over the thing that he had to confront. And he steadied himself. He said, I'm a Star Trek captain. This is effectively my job. And beyond his job, almost like a cosmic responsibility based on what he considers himself to be. He did the same. And he did it in the face of just knowing what was coming. And he continued to do his job. God bless him. I swear.
Exactly. Because again, just one last thing. This is I don't even remember the number, but at this point, these dozens of hospitals that have been come under the same type of attack. This is systemic. This is not an outlier. This is not Hamas stronghold. The UN just came out with a report saying that there's absolutely no evidence any of these hospitals were ever a Hamas, especially Kamal Arwan Hospital that has been under siege for a couple of months or more at this point.
Yep. You're absolutely right. One of the other stories I really wanted to get to had to do with this notion that Al-Jilani went from I'm only here just for a short time. We're going to have elections. And now it may take 4 years for elections. It may take a while. We need to let things marinate for a bit.
Yeah.
And what he's effectively saying is, I need to get my power base in line first, because it's not a caretaker government. It's a government. He's forming a government. Let's be honest with this, right? Even if you give him the best appraisal of this, you have taken power. You've deposed the other leader through terroristic activity backed by Turkey, backed by Israel, backed by the US. And notice Israel continues to steal more land in Syria, and he does nothing about it. In fact, I'll go further with it. I would argue that he effectively sold Syria to Israel for power, because I don't know another way around it. It puts you in the mind of Lenin going into Russia during the First World War, where Lenin effectively created a civil war by dividing up Russia, giving part to the Germans in order to take power. And it is widely believed that he was sent there by the Germans to do exactly what he did to breaking up Russia. Giuliani seems to have done the exact same thing. Israel takes more land. Anytime anyone in his government is asked about Israel, they abdicate all responsibility while simultaneously saying, we're going to make Syria whole. Okay, well, no, you're not. Israel has just stolen land in Syria. They're administrating it as an occupation. You are doing nothing and saying nothing about the fact that Syria is being balkanized.
Yeah, they don't care. No, Giuliani absolutely does not care. In an interview yesterday, he actually came out and admitted that this coup that HTS conducted in Syria, it prevented. These are his words. It prevented a very large regional a war against Israel, in which Syria, Iraq, and Iran would participate, which could embarrass Turkey. So this is the reason, right? Like, he goes on TV. And he says, "Hey, like we took power in Syria because if we hadn't, this would embarrass Turkey and it would start a war against Israel." And now you see that the two main winners.
Just to marinate on that for a bit. We didn't want to embarrass Turkey by forcing it to choose sides with Iran to tackle Israel. Exactly. That is what Erdogan is called Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. These are his words. Right? This is Erdogan. We're calling him Hitler, calling them, the Israeli army, like they're like the Nazi army, etc. Erdogan is just a man that he's a political savvy, right? Like probably one of the most savvy leaders in the world. And I think that what he achieved in Syria more than proves it. But yes, to go back to your point, Israel at this point is they did this flash land grab, right? They grabbed about 500 square kilometers of Syrian land in the south. Just yesterday, they were walking into the center of Quneitria in the south of Syria, expelling government officials from the state buildings and taking control of them. And what does the Syrian government under the former the protege of the founder of ISIS and of and himself the founder of Al Qaeda in Syria? What does he say about this? Nothing. Even the governor of Damascus that he appointed said a few days ago, we have no problem with Israel, right? He said, our problem is not with Israel. The problem is with someone else that is not taking over any of Syrian territory. But they are, if anything, about these former ISIS and Al Qaeda members, they're not dishonest, right? They're being pretty straightforward with these things. You can take the terrorists out of the military fatigues and the turbans, put him into an Armani suit. But their instincts are always going to be the same, and it's very interesting because it's been wow, like 3 weeks, 3 something weeks since the fall of the Syrian government, since Giuliani, now calling himself Ahmed al-Shara, takes control of the country. Trims his beard, wears these fancy suits, and starts getting visits from absolutely every single Western and Gulf official. And now he's saying, no, elections are going to take 4 years, right? We are going to be here for at least 4 years. A constitution is going to take at least 3 years. And as you're saying, he's naming officials. He's named a foreign minister. He's named a defense minister, an intelligence chief, the head of the central bank. governor of Damascus, governor or whatever, etc. You know, he's just naming person after person. Who are these people? They are all members of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They are all former members of Al-Qaeda. They are all have ties with ISIS. They are all officials that al-Sharaa himself had already worked with in Idlib, right, in the northwest of Syria, where he has ruled for several years now. He's just transferring, right? He's just like picking from his own previous administration, semi-autonomous, maybe if you even want to call it that. He's just grabbing them, putting them in these new positions, and now they're going to be there for 4 years. The intelligence chief of Syria was also a former member of a former founder of Al-Qaeda, former ISIS commander, etc. It's absurd, right? And now you have all of these leaders sending delegations, meeting with them, giving them playties, giving them recognition. They are just handing them official recognition to this formerly, just a few days ago, still wanted terrorist, right? HTS is still UN, US, EU designated terrorist organization. It doesn't matter, I guess, right? As long as you prevented a war with Israel, a country that is committing a genocide, that is committing a Holocaust.
That's the wild part.
It's incredible
right?
that this is the state of things.
Yeah, that's the wild part. I mean, these guys who are warriors of Islam, as they call it, and yet Israel is stealing more and more territory, and they have nothing to say.
When they talk about we have 4 years, right? We're going to be here for at least 4 years. Remember one thing, and I want your listeners to always keep this in mind. All of these people, because one last thing, he gave he named to top positions a number of foreigners in the new Syrian army. He named, Egyptians, Jordanians, Turks, Turkmenistanis, Azerbaijanis, etc., just like from all over Central Asia.
These people aren't even Syrian.
Lieutenant colonels.
Yeah.
These people, when they came to Syria, and this is the last point I want to make, when they came to Syria, they didn't come to build a liberal democracy. They didn't come from Uzbekistan and from Turkey and from the US and from France as well. Okay, don't kid yourselves about that. And from wherever else. They didn't go to Syria because they wanted, to topple Assad and build a liberal democracy with diversity and accessibility for all. No, they want a caliphate. They want an Islamic caliphate. And remember, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they want a global caliphate, not a local regional caliphate. They want the entire world. And these are the people now that are being given a recognition by the international community.
Just astonishing. I mean, it really is astonishing. I mean, like, for one, to your point, they're not Syrians. Many of them aren't even Syrians. The majority of the people he's put into his cabinet are from elsewhere that he's going to give citizenship to now that they've overthrown the government of the country. And, it puts me in the mind of people who, will say, well, I have an open mind for things that make sense. And of course, the things that make sense to them is this kind of narrow window of things that they establish as being okay. Mm-hmm. And so from his standpoint, yeah, we're going to have an open Islamic country. And it's like, what about the Alawites? F those Alawites. Those people are going to get killed. And those people have been getting killed. Christians have had their homes stolen. I mean, you've had people being dragged through the streets. I mean, this stuff is grisly. And the West is like, this is what democracy looks like. You should see the nonsense that comes out of this media here in the United States about what is taking place over there. It is astonishing. It is appalling. And I'm glad you brought up the point about the Turkey thing. I had forgot about that. How weird that is, where he's effectively saying, well, because keep in mind, Erdogan said, we had nothing to do with this. We have no idea how this happened. Assad should have negotiated, but our hands weren't on it at all.
Yeah. Remember, they wanted to normalize with Syria. For almost 2 years, they were begging and pleading and asking at every turn to normalize with Syria. And then all of a sudden, they are the first ones. Turkey is going to be the one printing Syrian IDs and passports. Yep. Turkey is extending power lines from the south into Idlib, into Aleppo, possibly into Damascus to provide electricity for Syria. And they're talking about, we are going to do everything to give Syria stability. Wow, all of a sudden, Turkey is...
Now they care about stability. Well, and the reason is obvious, right? Because if you have a country that is under the conditions that Assad was dealing with, then it's untenable.
The
I mean, they were
sanctions.
talking about people living like $5 a month. You know, the government had no money to do anything. The military was barely paid, if it was paid at all. It was dependent upon things coming from Russia or, for that matter, Iran. And so now Erdogan is like, all right, we need to ensure that these are not the conditions that my new government, Erdogan's, my new government in Syria, doesn't have to deal with. And so, yeah, we need you to remove the sanctions. We need to create stability in the country, in the region. You even heard him, the guy, Jalani. Well, we need to make sure the Russians stay because we need some level of stability in Syria. And, you know, if the Russians leave, Israel is probably going to take that territory.
Mhm.
Like, it is astonishing what is happening there, and the propaganda that's
And the way that is
on
being
top of it.
normalized. And the way
Yeah,
that
it's
being
very
normalized.
weird.
Mhm.
By the way, do you think that they allowed him to be in that position because terrorists are easy to come up with a reason to topple? Meaning, yeah, we're going to let you take it for right now, but we're not going to have a terrorist really occupying that position of power for any length of time, per se. Like, do you think it's that? Because I am shocked that they're okay with the jihadists forming a government, knowing full well what that means. I mean, we were hit on 9/11 by people like him.
The war on terror started because of Al Qaeda, right?
Yes,
The 20
yes.
plus year war on terror was the catalyst was Al Qaeda. And now all of a sudden, Al Qaeda is in power in Syria, and you have the US State Department, Barbara Leaf, having a warm conversation with the founder of Al Qaeda in Syria, with the protege of the founder of ISIS. And lifting the bounty, and the IMF coming in and saying we are ready to help rebuild Syria. Like all of a sudden the coffers are open, the sanctions are being the lifting of the sanctions is being discussed. And I do think, on the one hand, the State Department, probably that is the calculus what you just said, which is if they get out of hand, we'll bring the next one, the next one in line. Julian is just a dog. He's nothing but a dog. He's a dog in an Armani suit, a dog nonetheless.
What do you think of my argument that he sold Syria to Israel? Because I like, for all of this talk about making Syria whole, that's not what's happening at all.
Not at all.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, Turkey is exerting a massive amount of control over it in one angle. Israel is taking it in another angle. The Americans are still there holding on to the wheat, or for that matter, to the oil. It's been balkanized by these forces that are in the country. I mean, Russia has been invited into the country, but even that's a power center on some level into the country, even though it's a minor one in considering the entirety of the country.
A few days ago, the Russian foreign intelligence was warning that there's a plan brewing to have ISIS attack the Russian bases, right? Which it's not a completely, especially now, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. And I feel like a lot of the things that the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service had been warning since around 2022 or 2021 have come to fruition. They were warning 2 years ago about the Ukrainians working with HTS and all of these terror factions in Syria.
And they were.
Yeah. And they were. And they were. Now we have complete confirmation that indeed they were.
They were teaching terrorists how to do drones. And apparently they wanted to take the war to Russia in Syria.
Yeah. So
they can't even win it in their own country.
The Ukrainian foreign minister was in Damascus yesterday sitting with Ahmed al-Shara. Right. So in all of their statements, to me, one thing that is fascinating about the way this is being covered, and I guess not just because the dishonesty of Western media, but more like I guess like the people who are internalizing this news, is that you are being told that a Sharia law and an Islamic republic is the source of all evil in the world and needs to be destroyed. But then Sharia law and an Islamic caliphate is not. Right. So which is it? Right. I thought that these people were supposed to be evil, and in particular, in Syria, as you're saying, these are former terrorists. These are, former, right? Like as if you can shed your head chopping ways, as if you can shed what you're saying, right? They are persecuting Christians, they're persecuting Alawites. The Syrian Shiites are terrified of of what may happen next. And then meanwhile, in the south, you have Israel running rampant, and they're not going to leave. Who's going to make them leave? Who's going to make Israel leave Syria? Why would they leave, right? All of a sudden, their dream of greater Israel is right there. Greater Israel extends past Damascus and almost into Turkey. That's their actual, what they feel is their promised land. And also, this is also the Turkey's incursion in the north is also a threat to Hezbollah in Lebanon, because now all of a sudden, at this point, the Israeli army is saying they don't want to leave Lebanon. They don't plan to leave the south of Lebanon after the 60-day ceasefire ends, which was the terms they agreed upon at the beginning. If Hezbollah, which has said, if you don't leave, the only path is resistance, if they again decide to take up arms, all of a sudden they're going to have an entire ISIS/Al-Qaeda apparatus backed by the U.S. government, backed by the Turkish government, and supporting Israel at their back, right at their back. So you have changed the equation for the entire region all of a sudden. Right, and as you're saying, Jamal, this is not about reunifying Syria. This is exactly about balkanizing it, about tearing it apart. And the big question here is, I think at this point, because as I said, I don't think that there's any question anymore about Israel. Israel's staying in south of Syria. The real question is in the north, is with the Kurds, the Kurds that fight on the side of the U.S. What's going to happen to them? Because they are saying we want to join the new Syrian army. They are saying we are ready to join. They're a bit desperate.
Wait, are they saying that? I got a very angry email. He was very respectful, but it was very angry. And he pointed out, you don't know anything you're talking about the Kurds. The Kurds are Syrian. They have every right to be there. And he effectively took the piss out of me in the email. I guess my thing is, I don't have an issue with the Kurds one way or the other. Rojava doesn't exist. And, all things being equal, they fought on behalf of the United States against the Syrian government. Again, this is not a rah-rah for Assad. It's not that. It's more so that the moment that Assad leaves, all hell breaks loose. Just like when Saddam Hussein left, all hell broke loose. And when Gaddafi left, all hell broke loose. And that stuff is not to the leader themselves. That stuff is to the people who are living there. Like, there's nobody in this country that believes Saddam Hussein leaving in that Iraq war was a good thing, despite the fact that they may have all sorts of bad things to say about Saddam Hussein. Same thing about Gaddafi, and I suspect it's going to be the same thing about Assad.
Look,
give me your take on that.
Well, first of all, what I'm talking about the army, I'm just going to read you very quickly the quote from the commander of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is a Kurdish militia that is in control of the northeast of Syria and controls and helps the U.S. maintain control of the oil fields. He says, a future Syria must have a single national army that defends the country. He says the weapons of the SDF will be the weapons of the national army integrated into it. And then he says for this to happen, the discussions are needed to reach a suitable formula, right? Discussions, of course, with HTS and with the factions that are currently waging war against the SDF, right? I'm just seeing now that the Pentagon on Monday said that a ceasefire in the north of Syria is still holding, and that is I'm gonna.
No, it's not. That's the other just taking territory.
That is a complete
that's nonsense.
That is nonsense. It's not happening. The clashes are happening as we speak.
That's right.
There's over, I think, close to 200 at this point people killed in these clashes in which you have. And, I have to apologize for your audience because in Syria, there is absolutely no shortage of acronyms at this point. It just gets very confusing very quickly in Syria.
Yeah.
But you have the SDF, right? The SDF, a US-backed Kurdish militia that has since 2017 been in control of Syria's oil and wheat fields. Why? To fund what they call an semi-autonomous administration, an autonomous administration in the north of Syria, which is, the SDF government, so to speak, right? They have been coming under attack for the past, since the fall of the Assad government by the Syrian National Army. The Syrian National Army is it's a melange of former ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Free Syrian Army fighters, right? Some of them at one point former Syrian soldiers, many of them, these so-called moderate rebels, and also many of them just a bunch of former ISIS and Al-Qaeda members. They have been launching attacks against the SDF in the east of Aleppo with Turkish air support. Why?
Mhm.
Because Turkey wants to get rid of the Kurds at their border, right? Yes, Kurds are Syrian, just like Kurds are Iraqi, and just like Kurds are also exist in the south of Turkey. They have
Exactly.
their legitimate struggle. They have their legitimate belief system, right, of what land belongs to them. But at this point, they are being attacked heavily by Turkey, because Turkey wants to eradicate the SDF. Why? Because the SDF, the main backbone of it, is made up of Kurdish fighters that belong to the People's Protection Units, the YPG, again, another acronym. The YPG is closely allied, has very close historical, up to this day, links with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which is the terrorist organization that Turkey, we know, a group that Turkey labels, and but many in the West as well, a terrorist organization that they want to eradicate in the south of Turkey, and in the north of Syria, and in the north of Iraq as well. Turkey has been conducting airstrikes in those regions for a while now, for many months, even before the fall of Assad. So I think that's the real question right now, because these Kurds, they are supported by the US, but then on the other hand, this wouldn't be the first time that they are abandoned by the US, because this has happened already. It has happened a couple of times before, in which the US has essentially said, well, thank you for all your help, good luck.
My assumption was that they were going to be eradicated. I mean, and the reason why I thought that was, as you kind of pointed out, I mean, they continue with this notion of creating Kurdistan, and for some reason believe Turkey is going to be okay with them taking part of Turkey to do it. Most countries are not okay with losing territory.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? Going all the way back to the Ottoman Empire, but the borders have been added. It's not, I didn't add those borders, the Brits added those borders, but it kind of is what it is. The countries are going to defend themselves in the way that they defend themselves. From the standpoint of the Kurds, though, I mean, being that they're backed by the US, do you think the US is effectively saying, look, you need to join the new government? We help put that government in place. We want a stable government. We don't want these fighting to continue. We don't want a war on this front. And on some level, I would imagine the US government has to be, well, concerned might be the wrong word. They might have assumed that a country that is accustomed to, let's say, religious liberty, meaning for all of Assad's ills, the one thing he did right was, I don't care what you worship. If you want to go out in a bikini, God bless you. If you want to walk around with no shirt on, God bless you. If you want to sunbathe, I don't care. If you want to be Alawite Christian, God bless. That is all of a sudden now you have one God, and that God is Allah. And it's my Allah, not your Allah.
My interpretation, exactly.
Yeah, my interpretation of it. It's my God is the only God. And that there's going to be a huge amount of consternation associated with a country that is not familiar with it. Like, I couldn't imagine somebody coming into Washington, D.C. and saying, from here on out, all of you serve one God. It would just be astonishing, right? It wouldn't fly.
I think the United, just what you're saying, I think the United States' main concern is always just going to be Israel, right? It doesn't matter who has to go into the oven to safeguard Israel's right to self-defense. They're going to send them right in. So I think at this point, the Kurds, they are really caught between a rock and a hard place, because the Pentagon is lying, right? I mean, we know all of these spokespeople, they are hired because they're good liars. But this is absurd, because their allies themselves are giving out reports about how this is not true, about the ceasefire, right? It is not holding. And they are legitimately afraid that the ethnic cleansing is going to come back for them, because Turkey has already committed a genocide, right? Just 100 years ago, Turkey already committed a genocide with the Armenians. And now they're seeing another state commit a genocide with the complete support of the entire Western media apparatus. Turkey is a NATO member in the end, possibly a lesser NATO member, right? Because Turkey is an Islamic state, and we know, right, that racism runs very deep in all of these organizations, Western organizations. So I don't know if they will get the same treatment as Israel, right? If they all of a sudden start just killing Kurdish people left and right. But I don't know. It's a brand new world. It's a completely brand new world, and I think the Kurds really need to start realizing that that putting their chips in with the U.S., hoping that the U.S. is going to stand with them when it push comes to shove, it's not going to go.
Not so much. Esteban Carrillo, man, thank you for this. I wanted to bring people who were really good friends of the show, people who I love talking to close out the year. And man, you have been one of them, whether it was on the radio show or this one. I deeply appreciate you, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me, Jamal, and a happy New Year to you, and a happy New Year to everyone listening. And well, let's see what the future holds next for everyone.
And by the way, the Cradle, damn good. Man,
yes,
follow that publication. Damn good publication. Esteban Carrillo, he's a Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist and current editor for the Cradle. Previously with Tell Us Sir English. Have a good New Year, man.
You too, as well, Jamal. Bye.
Bye. All right. I want to bring in my guest, the one and only man of the hour. He always has something fascinating to say out of his mouth every time he opens it, and I appreciate him for coming on. Caleb Maupin. He is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. He has a new book, The Killing of Brian Thompson. Do I have that right? Good. I want to make sure I get the title right. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Sure.
I was going through the other part, but I realized the other part didn't necessarily apply anymore because it's not the same book.
Yeah. Well, it's The Killing of
man.
Brian Thompson and the Danger of an American Years of Lead. That's actually the full title. And
please go into that. Let's start off with that, just because I wanted to get a good outing for this book. When did it come out? It just came out, correct?
It did. And it's been up and down on Amazon. Amazon's a little uncomfortable with it, but right now it's up on Lulu, for sale. So
Amazon
being a little weird. It's not like before where they completely scrubbed it. With the Kamala Harris book, it had sold just fine for 4 years, and then they scrubbed it, and then 7 days later they backed down or whatever. This is a little bit different. It's been up, and it's not completely scrubbed, but I think there's some issue with the title or something. But regardless, it's up on Lulu for now. That's where people can get it. So
what is the book about?
Well, the book is about the murder of the CEO of United Healthcare, and the way it is being celebrated. And I am warning of the danger of something akin to the years of lead in Italy. From the 1960s to the 1980s, Italy experienced a huge amount of political violence with fascists and communists killing each other in the streets. And we now know that it was because Italy was poised to leave NATO. The Communist Party was very popular, and if they had joined the government, Italy would have withdrawn from NATO. And so the CIA launched something called Operation Gladio. And Operation Gladio involved fomenting all kinds of political violence and ultimately keeping Italy in NATO. The population became weary of the violence. People got out of politics because they didn't want to get killed. And it ultimately resulted in Italy to this day being a member of NATO. Now, I argue that with Donald Trump poised to take a second term and with the fact that the U.S. public is highly polarized, that there's a similar kind of psyop going on. Because you'll notice many of the voices who denounced Jimmy Dore at the top of their lungs and said, how dare he say force the vote, are celebrating killing somebody on the streets of New York City. And I don't understand how that works. You know, if a parliamentary procedure is some kind of, real violence against AOC and just unacceptable, why is it okay to shoot somebody on the streets of New York City? I don't get that. I'm not going to defend Brian Thompson. I mean, obviously the guy made his career denying people health care, made billions of dollars doing it. I'm not going to defend that. But acts of senseless violence are not going to solve it. We need a real mass movement of people getting together and making real demands. The problem is not, quote unquote, bad people like Brian Thompson. The problem is a system. And it's going to require systemic change. And, isolated acts of vengeance are not the solution. And this is what revolutionary forces have always said, that change doesn't come through individual terror. It comes through creating mass movements. And the killing of Brian Thompson just kind of reinforces the idea that the problem is bad people. And if we just intimidate and terrify these bad people who run the healthcare companies, they'll be nice and fix things. And that's not what the problem is. Brian Thompson was the CEO of a company who was obligated to maximize profits for his shareholders. And if he was making decisions based on what he thought was in the interest of public good, his shareholders could have sued him for violating contract because his job was to maximize profits. The problem is that our healthcare system is operated for profit. It's not individuals, so that's my thoughts. And I go into great detail about Project MKUltra, about the political violence in Jamaica during the 1970s and 80s that had a similar result to Italy, about the troubles in Northern Ireland, about the counterinsurgency strategies put forward by William S. Lind and Frank Kitson and others. And I argue that escalating to some kind of violence and some kind of violent confrontation is ultimately not going to help us get healthcare in the United States. And this is part of a political strategy for dealing with the fact that the American people overwhelmingly disagree with the direction the country is going in. And they're trying to manage this unrest. And the hope is that if you create a huge amount of violence, people will just kind of step back and the status quo can win by default.
I agree with you. I'm going to say that first. I do agree with you. And I think I've made similar arguments about this idea that, these systems are not individual. Like, it's not one guy who's making a determination one way or the other. It's kind of a system that kind of pushes a person to do what the person is doing for whatever reason the incentives go with. In his case, like you said, he's head of a company. His job is to maximize his profit. It just so happens he maximizes at the pain and injury of other people. And so I think the difference between the door thing, because I remember the force the vote thing, I think it was the way that he was going after her seemed so hyperbolic. And that is a very narrow segment of the population that is paying attention to that and it's dealing with that. Whereas for healthcare, that's everybody. Like, most people deal with insurance companies and hate their very guts. It's like, I have cancer, or I have some other disease, or I have some kind of injury. And then I have to go through this edifice that in many respects would deny care, despite the fact that your doctor said that your doctor wanted X or Y. But there were some tests that wanted to be run. And there are a team of doctors sitting in insurance companies saying, yeah, they don't really need that. Let's do something else. Meaning, in one case, it's very narrow and very specific. And so he's going to get criticism from the standpoint of door. In this case, it is universal of people who have had to deal with those companies and just hate those companies' guts. And so when the guy got whacked, their thought was, screw him. I don't necessarily think it was this notion of let's have open season on CEOs. I think it was more so just this, this gut level release, this kind of, because if you notice, under normal circumstances, when somebody gets killed, the public doesn't applaud. The public is like, oh, that's outrageous. That's horrible. I can't believe the person did that. And the thing in people's heads, from the standpoint of justice, when that person gets convicted, when that person gets put in prison, there's an applause. There's like, okay, good, justice. And I don't mean it in the sense of purely a legal sense. I mean it in the sense of this kind of esoteric thing that people feel when the scales are balanced. They felt that way almost without being pushed. It was just felt. It felt on some level to many people like it was earned. I chafe at this notion of deserved, even though I know a lot of people will say, well, yeah, he deserved it. But to your point, it's a systemic issue. So agreed. I do think there's a difference between those things, but I understand your point, and I agree with your point that this is a systemic issue, and shooting CEOs is not going to be the thing that gets you healthcare or gets you education or gets you, expansion of Medicare or whatever. So fair point. I agree with you. I do agree with you.
And kind of what you're describing there, which sure, a lot of people felt that way and are totally justified to feel that way. But that is a kind of bitter feeling, right? That's just kind of like, all right, I've been screwed by my insurance company. They've screwed over some other people. So now somebody killed one of the bastards. All right. And then you go back and accept the way your life is. And you don't join a mass movement. And it's kind of like getting stuck in a negative cycle. It's a pessimistic, bitter, vengeful, resentful way of looking at things. It's not the optimism that we need to build some kind of movement. And in the book, I actually I compare this to abstract art and the way abstract art makes you feel versus the way social realism makes you feel. Because during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the CIA had a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, where they waged war on social realist art that they thought encouraged potential socialist, communist, anti-imperialist mass movements. And then they promoted abstract art and the work of Jackson Pollock and others. specifically because of the emotions it made people feel. When you look at a social realist painting, like there's this beautiful painting of John Brown in the state legislature or the state capitol building of Kansas, right? And he's holding his rifle up in the air, and he's, it's called Tragic Prelude, and it's just an amazing portrait of a lot of working people rallying behind John Brown. When you look at that painting, you feel empowered. You want to join something. Whereas when you look at a Jackson Pollock painting where he just kind of splatters paint on a canvas, you feel disorganized, right? You feel disempowered, you feel confused, right? And that these are important things. And I mean, the reason they spent billions of dollars on MK Ultra and all of that is they're trying to figure out which of these feelings they would like to cultivate and which they would like to oppose. And that ultimately it is a mass movement involving millions of people, not some bitter individual going out and taking an isolated act of revenge that's going to change the world. And that this has a psychological dynamic. And that's what the book gets into. And I did a lot of research. I did study Frank Kitson was considered the father of counterinsurgency, and he's responsible for the defeat of the Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army in Kenya. He's also responsible for the defeat of the Provisional Irish Republican Army and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And he developed some very demented methods of controlling subversives and preventing insurgency. And you look into it, a lot of it is creating a very negative, ugly atmosphere where the violence doesn't make any sense anymore, where the communists are killing other communists, where the radicals are killing other radicals. No one knows what the violence is about. It's mixed up with organized crime, and everyone just kind of goes back to the way things are, right? And I mean, why have the Democrats not taken any action around healthcare? They've had the White House for 4 years, and they did nothing about it. And you'll recall around the time Jimmy Dore was talking about force the vote, there were those Medicare for all marches. You would think that the Democrats would have been all about that, except they weren't. And in fact, the non-participation of one individual, there was one former Nazi in Indiana who was going to participate in one of the rallies. That was the topic of 4 different articles in a major publication. And Salon.com and Countercurrents and all these publications did one article about how one former Nazi in Indiana participated but he didn't even end up participating. They ended up canceling the Indiana Medicare for All march, but it was just endless. The relentless, oh my God, if you go to the Medicare for All marches, you're supporting Nazis. It was ridiculous. And so the Democrats have done nothing about healthcare when people like Jimmy Dore or the Medicare for All movement were actually doing things like about healthcare. They got demonized and smeared and attacked. But now somebody committed an act of violence on the street and we're supposed to applaud. And I believe that this is because Trump is about to take office, because they realize that there is a big section of the public that they can't control. And if they can escalate things to the point of kind of senseless violence where people get nervous, everyone will kind of get weary and the status quo will win by default. I mean, I point out, for example, the way counterinsurgency is generally waged is what they do, and this is the strategy, is that they don't want there to be a light switch effect, right? If it's like you're either with the establishment or you're against it, well, then the anti-establishment forces win because people are mad at the status quo. They want to make it like you're with the establishment or you're in crazy land. There's a million different places you could be. Chaos, violence, instability, competing ideologies, crazy conspiracy theories. So by default, people just kind of go back to the status quo. And that's kind of what they've done. That's how they've managed dissent in the United States. You notice anytime any news event happens, immediately all over Twitter, all over Facebook, you have people calling it a false flag. And they've created this thing where you can believe CNN or you can go into crazy land, and there's just kind of crazy stuff competing with each other. There's not a clear message. There's different people who hate each other, and that's how they win, is they create this atmosphere where the dissident community is so confused and divided and angry and saying contradictory things, and everyone just kind of goes back to supporting the status quo. And that's what they were able to do in Northern Ireland. That's what they were able to do to some degree in Kenya with the Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army. Frank Kitson developed the method of psychological operations and the use of what he called counter gangs. And that is how they're able to control what he calls subversives. And in classic counterinsurgency narratives, they argue that subversion leads to terrorism. terrorism leads to civil war. Now, what they mean by terrorism is mass movements that are able to exercise power and force, the government to do things. I don't consider that to be terrorism. That's a different thing. But they argue, Frank Kitzen's, counterinsurgency writing, he argues that all societies are in some level of counterinsurgency at all times. No society is ever purely at peace or purely at war. And then it's kind of, you have subversion, you have terrorism, you have civil war, and that the goal is to, keep things as low as possible in the category of subversion as long as possible, prevent any kind of mass movement that he would consider to be terrorism, and then ultimately prevent a situation where the government itself divides and you have some kind of civil war. And so if you can keep the subversives at each other's throats, if you can keep the subversives divided, confused, isolated, then you can keep the currently existing state in power. And that's what I argue is being done. And I argue that the glorification of this isolated act of violence serves that end.
I know, but do you accept that this is natural phenomena, though? Meaning a public that feels a public that feels disempowered with an inability to do anything because they feel the political branch is effectively captured, which it is. And they believe that the political branch is not working in their best interest, meaning a political solution is required for, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, for any of those issues. And a political solution, as you pointed out, especially for the Medicare for All stuff, is nowhere to be found because of the way the political parties are organized. And the left party that is supposed to, at the very least, philosophically, supposed to care about that issue, fundamentally doesn't, because all things being equal is getting his money from the same place. The killing of the CEO, I accept it as, okay, well, this guy did that. But to me, the public sentiment to it is natural, meaning it may not be great. And as you pointed out, it is a very bitter thing, but I don't get the sense that it needs to be managed or massaged. It's just kind of a natural phenomenon as a result of A, feeling disempowered, and B, this kind of release valve of what took place within context of that disempowerment. Or do you disagree with that?
Well, first of all, I do want to just put out there, I'm not sure Luigi Mangione is guilty. I've seen some rather convincing evidence that he may not actually be the guy. They may have the wrong guy. The eyebrows don't match. There's other things about him that
the lips don't match. Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, so I want to throw that out there, and it's really odd that Mayor Eric Adams didn't use the word alleged when he described the case. That the media has just kind of decided this guy is guilty, and then there's a social media chorus saying, "Yeah, he's guilty, and we love him for doing it, and look how good looking he is." It's like this guy has due process of law. Right. I mean, people have said this is kind of a weird, opposite of the O.J. Simpson case. And in the case of O.J. Simpson, they thought he was not guilty. In this case, all the fans are saying he's guilty, and I mean, it's
we love him. Right, we love him for it.
Right. Yeah, it's a very, very bizarre situation. But that said, again, the response of the establishment to things like the Medicare for All march, things like Force the Vote, has been this overwhelmingly hostile one, because that's what could actually make change. And that I don't think there's any danger in the establishment glorifying. This is just, look, somebody, there's no danger in the establishment glorifying this particular act. And it will also further create an atmosphere where people, will copy this. Look, I know, for example, right, as somebody who works in media, I know you know this as well, right, that if somebody goes and jumps off the Empire State Building tomorrow, we can't cover it because more people will do that, right? So usually when there's political violence, the response of the media in particular is to not play it up. They don't emphasize it because they don't want to have copycat incidents. But that's not what's happening here with the media. They're really, they're planning biopic documentaries about Luigi's life already. He hasn't even been convicted yet.
I think it's because they were so shocked at the response. I gotta be honest, I've never seen a situation where somebody gets killed and the public largely applauds. And there's this division between the public's point of view of hey, good job. Like you said, we don't even know if the guy did it or not, but they're like, yeah, this guy did it and good job. He's this kind of hero. Whereas the elites are flipping out saying, oh my God, this is horrible. How can you people be applauding this? There's a weird, I've never seen this dynamic before. And, from my point of view, it's that should give some level of context to the level of anger that is in a society where you would see something like that. And as opposed to being repulsed by it, the majority of the public, especially the people who are poor, who have to deal with insurance companies and everything else, ultimately ended up agreeing. It's bizarre. I guess my point is, it's possibly that they're playing it up like in the media and everything else because they're so shocked at the response to what he did. It may not necessarily be something like a governmental force coming into play, maneuvering events. They almost don't have to, given the material conditions that people are living in.
Well, there's one parallel that I've seen, which is Christopher Dorner. If you remember 2013, former police officer Christopher Dorner, who had been fired for reporting on other police officers, like mistreating, people that were held in jail and stuff. Yeah. He launched a series of revenge killings against police officers. I believe it was in Los Angeles. And
I remember that. I do remember that.
Yeah, and there was very widespread social media support for Christopher Dorner because of the history of police brutality. But what you saw was Facebook and Twitter went out of their way to like suppress it because this guy was actively killing police officers. He was a former police officer who was on a revenge killing spree. And I mean, it was pretty vicious. He targeted their family members. And, it was just, it was a particularly vicious case, but there was widespread support for him because there was so much anger about police brutality. But what we did see in that case was an effort to at least, tamp down on the support. We didn't see, SNL when they mentioned Luigi Mangione on SNL, the studio audience burst into applause. You'll remember that on Weekend Update, right? And that was particularly odd. And then they, the host kind of laughs it off. You're applauding that he was arrested, right? You're applauding he was arrested.
Yeah, he was weirded out. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some kind of odd like innuendo about the whole case that is very disturbing. Look, if you look at the Charlottesville incident, right? It's not that everyone there was some secret agent or something like that. No one's saying anything crazy like that. But generally in the United States, for a long time, for the, last 50 years, some KKK people or whatever, they assemble, they have their protest. There's 1 million police around them. There's 1,000 protesters on the other side of the police line. And then everyone moves on with their lives. But the way things went down in Charlottesville, first of all, that event got a huge amount of publicity that it didn't normally get. Second of all, the normal police barricades and such were not there. And that whole incident in this tiny town in Virginia turned into a huge, event in which, Heather Heyer was killed as a car, drove into her. She was killed by a guy who was driving his car violently. And then there was a police helicopter that crashed. And that whole incident, if you look at it, many people have said, look, this was because Trump was in office, because there was a narrative that the country is becoming less and less stable, and that the powers that be almost kind of wanted some kind of violent event to happen to cement the idea that we have to get Trump out of office because the country is becoming less stable as a result. And that there were similar. I mean, there was the whole incident where I think Richard Spencer, the white supremacist, was in Washington D.C. for Trump's inauguration and got punched in the face. And then it became a meme, punch a Nazi, online, and that I believe that there is, at this point, a section of the intelligence apparatus that is trying to foment political violence in the United States. And it's not because they want change and they want people to get health care. And I think that's pretty clear. And it's pretty tragic because the stated purpose of, the intelligence agencies and the policing agencies is to prevent violence from occurring, right? They're supposed to be defenders of law and order. So why would it be that they would be creating a situation like this? But we know about the history of COINTELPRO and how different groups were played against each other and all of this. So we shouldn't be surprised. I will say, though, I find it amusing to see the liberals revive J. Edgar Hoover and talk about, Kash Patel. We got to be terrified of Kash Patel. We need good leaders like J. Edgar Hoover to run the FBI. That was a good man right there. I'm just like, oh my goodness. But
keep in mind, these are the same people that were lionizing Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, like the same people, George Bush. And I remember, man, that was during my political awakening. Oberman would come out day after day after day and do monologue after monologue about how horrible George Bush was. When Trump got in, he says, I apologize to George Bush. And it's like, okay, that's disgusting, right? I mean, their politics are entirely relative. It's not, this kind of, there's a stable level to which they exist, where there is a certain priority in the context of their ideals. It's not that. It is purely relative to the opposition and what the opposition stands for. Democrats man, I have very little regard for them in this case. But there's something, but I'm glad you brought that up. That one guy, one Nazi goes out and the media is the Nazis are for Medicare for all, despite the fact you have one guy who's doing it. And I watched this thing with Uyghur. My audience hates me for my point of view on this. But this was never been an argument for Uyghur. It's been an argument for what I think he's trying to do, which is this notion of, look, man, we have to get out of our bubbles. And we have to be able to reach into other groups. We have to be able to talk to other people as opposed to being in our own isolated bubbles. And that's regardless of what that bubble is, especially in a political context, in order to try to get other people who may actually be open to your point of view, but for various reasons. It could be cultural, because all sorts of reasons. People who they're around, they just never hear that message or never hear that point of view. I personally do think that there are a lot of people who are on different sides of the political spectrum that may agree on very specific things, even though the moment that you get into the wings, you may fall apart. But you don't really need them to agree on everything. Of the things that you want to get changed, that you agree upon, change those things. That is not the way it works in practice, though. And the Nazi thing brings it up to me because, so what if a Nazi wants Medicare for all? They have kids too. They have healthcare needs also, regardless of how hateful they may or may not be. I mean, that's assuming we have been going with the thing that the guy's a Nazi. The left often calls people Nazis or transphobic or racist or bigoted or whatever else. Give me your take on that. I mean, is there a way even around that? I mean, they have gotten weirdly cultish in the way that they've functioned, where, any deviation from a point of view, any lack of purity, and this goes for Democrats also, by the way. When Kamala Harris wanted to go on Joe Rogan, and they're like, oh no, he's a nationalist. Joe Rogan voted for Bernie Sanders, for God's sake. Or Elon Musk, who was a Democrat at one point, and may still be, depending upon the priorities, or if you actually talk to them and go into policy. I don't know what Elon Musk is. But I hope you get my point. Is there a way around that? Because I agree with you. You can win an election either through division or bringing people together. Where you break people up into blocks, and it's us versus them, and your side, you just need to get enough people on your side to win, where you kind of have this race to the bottom of mathematics of people together. Or you could say, we're together, all of us are workers, all of us care for our kids and our family, all of us want to do so and so and so and so, let's go change the world. How do you get around that politics of division that seems to take place because political parties feel that they need to win, and they feel they need to win by effectively making it us versus them, when it's really not an us versus them, especially if it's what I believe, that they are things that we agree upon that we should try to work towards changing, healthcare being one of them.
Well, I agree largely with what Cenk Uygur is saying. And, I've been saying things like that for the past, 6 or 7 years. What I don't appreciate from Cenk Uygur is all the hatred and, that he's poured out on people who said exactly what he's saying now.
1,000% agree.
Yeah, with no apology, right? I mean, that's where the frustration comes in. But yeah, I mean, I agree with I've been saying the exact same thing. Yes, there's plenty of people in the Trump camp that are anti-establishment. The defense of the establishment against Trump is not coming from a good place. You can disagree with different things about Trump, but you have to admit Trump derangement syndrome is not coming from a place of wanting what's best. It's coming from a defense of the FBI, from a defense of NATO, from a defense of the Pentagon, forever wars, and all of that. So, I mean, that's kind of where I stand with it is, yeah, I'm glad you're saying that, but I just wish there hadn't been so much, gut level, go for the kill hatred against anyone who said that for the past, at least 6 or 7 years. So there you go.
1,000% agree. 1,000% agree. No, man, I agree with you on this. I'm curious, from your point of view, looking at this year, what do you think is the biggest story that hasn't necessarily been reported in this year? We have about 3 minutes left. I'm curious on your take. And I meant to ask my other guest, and I didn't get a chance to ask him, but I'll ask you since we're closing the year out.
Okay. Well, I think that the thing that I find the most interesting is all these stances that Donald Trump has taken that did not match up with what even his own team was saying. I find that interesting. A lot of things that Trump said. For example, Trump wants to continue negotiating with North Korea. Wall Street Journal has denounced Trump over that. I mean, everyone on Trump's side is saying to him, we don't want you to do that. And Trump is saying, no, I want to negotiate with North Korea. That's interesting to me. I also think, why are people not looking into this guy who tried to kill Donald Trump, Ryan Roth?
Right there.
The ties to Ukraine, right? They've got this narrative that Iran tried to kill Trump. It looks to me like Ukraine tried to kill Trump. And that should be on the front page. I mean, the Ukrainian government is so dependent on that billions and billions of dollars of American money that's coming in. It looks to me like they tried to kill a presidential candidate. That should be on the front page of every newspaper. I mean, if we have some foreign government doing it and it's not Iran, it's Ukraine, that's a big deal.
And by the way, I said the exact same thing. I was like, this guy has, because Robert Fico has said as much, that he believes that the Ukrainian government tried to kill him since he was against the Ukraine war. And now you have Donald Trump, where a guy had been in Ukraine for God knows how long. The guy was obviously dangerous. I mean, he was noted to be dangerous. Comes back in the U.S., zero issue him coming back into the U.S., and then all of a sudden ends up being in a position of trying to whack a U.S. president. And they're like, nothing to see here, folks.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here.
Right. And then they want to run with this story about, Iran. Well, I'm sorry, the guy who got very, very close. I mean, and also what happened with the other one, right? The guy who got him in the ear. What's the story there? Why don't we have biopics and all kinds of background about who that guy is? We know nothing about that guy. Like, it's just been kind of brushed under the rug. Trump came very, very close to losing his life on July 13th of this year. And we know nothing about the guy who did it. And then we know the follow-up guy was pretty tied in with Ukraine. So all of that makes me think that there's potential that things could go in a good direction. At our event coming up on the inauguration, which I'm excited about you coming to, it'll be on January 20th. Yeah, Hilton Garden Inn. We got a lovely event. It's going to be good food and all kinds of stuff. We are going to be out, at the inauguration beforehand. We're calling on Trump to build a peace bridge over the Bering Sea to connect the United States via Alaska to the Russian Far East and pivot our economy away from NATO and toward the exciting new expansion that's going on in the East with the BRICS, et cetera. And ultimately, that will be in America's economic interest. If we can get out of this dying Western financial system and tie ourselves to the exciting new world. I mean, there's a whole slew of countries that are set to join the BRICS on January 1st. I don't know if you've seen, but, and yeah, very exciting. So I think the future of America economically is tied in with this new economy. It's not tied in with the British Empire and the colonial powers, et cetera. So I'm hoping that Trump can pivot the United States in that direction. And we're going to be doing our best to engage with anybody about how we can move away from imperialism and have a government of action that fights for working families.
By the way, I would love to have, is that event going to be filmed? I would love to play it in my channel. If you
it'll be live streamed and filmed, and yes, absolutely, we can do that for sure. Okay. Yeah.
If you are doing that through stream, shit, whatever you're doing that with, and however you're doing that, I would love to play it through my channel just so the audience can see it.
Peter Coffin is involved, and he's involved with all of that, and yeah, we'll do it for sure. Very good.
Badass, man. Caleb, you have a fantastic year, man. I really hope you have the best year that you've ever had in your life. Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His latest book, The Killing of Brian Thompson. What is the byline for that book?
And the Danger of an American Years of Lead. Yeah.
Dangers of America Years of Lead. Yeah. Operation Gladio. I hadn't heard about that one in a long time. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. You have a decent day and a fantastic year. Have a good one, Caleb. All right. Fantastic conversation with Caleb. What is this? They need to connect their mic before you can add them to the stream. Okay, Kofi, if you can hear me, I need you to connect your mic, my man, and we can bring you in for this interview. Kofi Kwaku is coming up. He is an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. When he gets back and when he connects his mic, we will have a conversation with him on that. But while we have a little bit of time, if you guys dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, hit that like button, slam into it with all of the power that your body can come up with. Also, hit the notification bell. I do interviews all sorts of day and night. I am an insomniac, so real men can't sleep. Real men do the news, even if it's 2 a.m, whenever it strikes my fancy. So definitely hit the notification bell. If you guys really dig this content, you can support this content through PayPal or Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chat or Super Stickers. All stickers or chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. And by the way, we have new family members. And I want to thank all of you who've joined the Thomas family. You guys help support the show. You help keep this content running. And I damn appreciate you all for doing so. Let me bring in my guests. We're joined with the one and only, the man of the hour, Kofi Kwaku. He's an Africa analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Man, welcome back. How you doing, Kofi?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Good
man, I am glad
to you.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you, man. I always enjoy bringing you on. We often don't get the opportunity to hear about what's taking place in Africa. It's a big continent, and a lot of stuff goes on. It's just outside of our eye shot. So I definitely always like to touch base to figure out where things stand and where things are. The latest news that I heard is that the French have packed their bags up and left Chad. I watched them leave and, disrepute, and pack their stuff and go. What's going on with this? So Chad is the latest country to kick out the French. Kofi, can you hear me?
Yes, this is really good news. I
Mhm.
can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you
I
hear
can hear
me?
you. I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Okay,
you.
so I think the line is a bit not quite good, but on my side, it looks like it's good. But I can hear you very well. Now, this is, I think, for a new year, end of the year news, it's quite very good because it really fits into what I call, breaking the hegemony of the echo chamber. Breaking that echo chamber hegemony of the French in West Africa, at least on many of these African countries. And it's really good news. But they're living in drip. They're not living quickly enough for many of us. And hopefully, if they're living in droves, it'll be a good thing because I think their foreign and external interferences into African politics has been a total disaster to the evolution of the continent in many ways. I must say that. So what I've done is, given that, I think probably you can also talk about what I call the year of resilience in Africa. And that year of resilience, really, I got to give credit to 3 Sahelian countries. As you know, you and I have been talking about these, and I keep saying we need to watch this sort of wave that's coming up from Mali, Burkina Faso, and then Niger. And they've done a tremendous job. I was looking at my person of the year. I struggled a bit to nominate one, but one that emerged very quickly for me is President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Oh, I thought you were. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had finished the
Can you
sentence.
hear me?
Now, why do you nominate him? Okay. He mentioned that his line was a little dodgy, and we will come back to him when his line gets right. Africa, look, the reason I cover Africa is because I have to be honest, I'm fascinated by it. When the coups took place, where the hunters came into power in the Sahel states, there was outrage in the US. Oh my God, these military dictators got into power. And, the reality of it is, you had a system that was put in place where Western countries, France, the US, were able to exert a certain amount of power over those governments that they were calling democracies. And the fact of the matter is, from their point of view, there was no way in order to, let's say, exert or take that control back short of getting those people out. And so you had a mass uprising. It's not like in Ukraine where half of the country is ethnic Russian Ukrainians, the other half is more geared towards the West, and you get the Western countries backing a band of terrorists to overthrow the government. It wasn't that. It was a mass uprising of resistance against imperialistic forces intervening into the politics of the country and calling it a democracy. When those juntas, if you want to call it that, kicked those, let's say, various leaders out, the public applauded. The public agreed. And so that's what he's referring to. Kofi, welcome back. I was just giving a slight update or a slight summary of what was taking place in regards to the Sahel states as you were going into it. Please continue. You mentioned that one of those leaders was meant to be like, if you had to give an award to him, he deserved it. Who is the leader? What country does he? Person of the year. Thank you. What country does he lead?
Ibrahim Traoré. Ibrahim Traoré, young president, 36 years old, and really great. In fact, next March he's turning 37, and he's shown an incredible leadership. It's not just that people hate the military. There's this sense that every time the military takes over, it's going to be a disorder. Of course, the history of Africa has taught us that. But I think this time there's something different, something quite special that the military are not really doing it, at least for those three countries I've mentioned, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They have a sense of Pan-Africanism and then a sense of coming together to be able to get rid, as I said again, to break the echo chambers of hegemony of the French and imperialism. And it's a new wave of decolonization. And, you know, I said the year of resilience because the president of Mali, Assimi Goïta, and then Ibrahim Traoré have gone through foil coup d'etats, 9 and 9 on each side. This is just unbelievable. And they're still alive. And
wait. I have to stop you on that. Did you say they've endured 9 coup d'etat attempts, meaning 9 times people have tried to overthrow them and they've been able to beat attempts?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, they have. This is incredible. And that's one of the reasons I call it the year of resilience. And they are making things happening like never before. In less than 2 years, those two young presidents, Mali, for example, Mali's managed to pay off its debt to the IMF. Burkina Faso is going to be doing the same thing. And we've never seen this before under the so-called democratic, elected president in those countries. So this is something extraordinary to pay attention to this wave. And then as part of that, for me, that awakening for the military, which is in Burkina Faso, many people are saying, which it may be a bit true, Ibrahim Traoré is channeling the spirit of Thomas Sankara, whom I'm sure you know about, who is the leader, the sort of revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, military revolutionary leader who was killed. But Ibrahim Traoré is sort of channeling him in a certain degree, but he's doing it in a way that's just, bringing a lot of young people in West Africa together. It's not easy, but really, you got to give him huge credit, Thomas.
I'm impressed. I mean, like, he's been able to take over a political apparatus and effectively use it. And how was he able to pay off the loans for the IMF? Because you're right. Normally it's like, oh, we can't do anything. And so now we have to sell our water system or sell out or sell whatever resource to whoever. How were they able to pay off the loan that quickly after they took power?
Well, this is exactly the myth that we've heard so many times about those countries being poor. And in fact, those countries are not poor. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they're so rich that 6 months' revenue could pay off all their debts right away. And so what he's managed to do, especially in Mali, I'm taking the case of Mali first, and then I'm going to go to Burkina Faso. Mali's been able to pay, I think it was 300 million and a little bit over to the IMF right away. and they're getting money from usually unpaid tax resource companies. We now call them resource company, but in the old days we called them mining companies. And one of them, which I don't know if I should say the name, but anyway, it's run by South African CEO. So the Malian government told him, look, here are the books for a couple of decades or so, 10 or 15 years, you haven't paid your taxes and back taxes and so forth. And as you know, there's also this whole idea about illicit flows, big issues that drive money, wealth countries out of the countries. And so they just grabbed them and they said, well, if you don't, you're not going out of this jail. And guess what? He was supposed to pay 500 million US dollars. A week later, and I think the Malian government used part of that money to pay off their debt with the IMF. Incredible.
He owed 500. He owed that much in taxes, meaning he had skated on paying taxes to the tune of $500 million, and the previous government didn't do anything about it?
Of course they didn't, because most of them were bought. But let's give it the weight it deserve that money. And let's say $500 million. $500 million. This is a lot of money. And this money was sitting there and they were not paying. Same thing is now happening in Burkina Faso, where the Burkina government just grabbed the CEOs of these mining companies and told them, look, you're going to pay 160 million US dollars, or we're not letting you go. Guess what? They paid up. So this whole idea of resource sovereignty is really the key. Remember, you and I have been talking about this for the past almost, I think, 2 years, and it's so critical. If not only collected properly with taxes or systems that work for revenues, but also used well, those countries are not poor. They're some of the wealthiest in the world. Mali's got gold, lithium, rare earth. Same for Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is first producer of gold in Africa. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We just completed building a gold refinery, which is going to be really good for them to control at least part of that value chain around gold mining.
You know what's sad about that? Because you're right. And I've heard this argument many times before. There's something to be said for this kind of economic might. But the reality of it is you can't eat your dollars. Things boil down to resources. And I think we found that in the war in Ukraine, where the West is like, well, we have all of this financial might. We have all of these financial industries. We're going to crush the ruble. We're going to destroy the Russian economy. And come to find out, regardless of what you think about Russia, people need oil, people need grain, people need, the resources that they have at their disposal, and they're a resource superpower. And it was basically, it allowed that government to exist despite all of the might that was being availed against it from the NATO nations. And truth be told, Africa as a continent is astonishingly rich. I mean, it's the reason why all of these Europeans were colonizing it in the first place, the materials and everything else that they can get out the country. And that's what they've been doing, extracting value out of Africa without letting that value go to the Africans that are in the country or the continent itself. And so, are we looking at a new Africa that is aware of that and is starting to take this kind of point of view of, hey, we actually do have resources that we can use to back our own economic self-interest. And we're going to exploit those resources every bit as much as Europeans were exploiting those resources. That money is going to come and stay in Africa from here on out. Is that what we're looking at? And something that effectively started as a junta that they were doing everything in their power to get rid of is now used as an example for the rest of Africa. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, Jamal. Absolutely. And I just insist on the term absolutely. It's not just the fact that they're now becoming aware, because these ideas have been there since the 60s anyway, with Kwame Nkrumah, President Patrice Lumumba, all these revolutionary groups, and including the African National Congress in South Africa, and so forth and so forth. But what is more important is that there's a deepening realization, especially, I think another story that we haven't spent much time, and we should when we get time, to look at the very powerful, strong and growing role of African awakened influencers on social media, for example. They've been some of the most powerful contributors to awakening the minds and then soul of many Africans about what it means, first of all, to be African. Second, to be aware that, in fact, the continent is so wealthy. It's not a poor continent. When the World Bank writes a report to say that, Africans are surviving on a $2 a day. I mean, where in the world did they get that kind of indicator, that misleading indicators, when tons of goals are run to these countries daily, weekly, monthly, every year? And so it's important. So most of these awakening is happening deeply daily. And the media, social media, has been playing a role. The growth of many of these people on the internet is just astounding and extraordinary. People are just listening to them. Millions of them are picking alternative sources of information. They're not listening to Radio France International much anymore, nor the BBC anymore. These are losing their strength, even including Voice of America. No wonder the effect has been so powerful, including, of course, the support of Sputnik International, and then RT itself. These are the channels of awakening people are listening to in English and French and in Swahili, whatever. And I think there hasn't been much work around. This is a missing story. In fact, you were asking your earlier guest what was missing. For me, that will be that one. But the other missing story that hasn't been covered is the extraordinary role of Russia in helping secure and making Africans feel like the security is negotiable. They should strengthen that security before starting to do anything else. Of course, economics is important. And Russia's role has been dismissed, played out, underplayed. Russia's is playing a powerful role right now in awakening and supporting most of these governments in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and now it's moving to Chad. And you'll see more and more. There are about 34, 35 African countries now building strong relationship with African nations. And of course, you'll hear the dismissal in, global Western media. So we have to be careful. They're playing a powerful role. And I think Russia will play more of that role in terms of security. And China will continue to play its role on the economic security side. And the combination of these two are so powerful. It will help to do what I call the second wave of decolonization of Africa.
I agree with you. Because it comes across, even if you look at BRICS in and of itself, it looks like Russia and China are like an anchor together with many of the other countries. I'm not going to call them satellites because, the multipolarity, these countries are equal. But from the standpoint of either economic or, for that matter, military might or industrial might, the combination of the two are astonishingly powerful when you think about it. And so if you're looking for a new order of things, or let's say something to contest this kind of Western-centric slant that the world has, those two countries have provided a backbone in a way that I haven't necessarily seen in my lifetime. And yeah, Russia made a play for Africa, and so did China. When I was in Kenya, for example, there are casinos all over the place, including Chinese-specific casinos, because there are so many Chinese businessmen and diplomats in the country that they wanted somewhere where they could basically cut loose. And so they would have casinos that were considered Chinese casinos. And I would imagine that's taking place all over Africa. And I remember J.D. Vance was making a speech, and he says, when China goes places, it builds bridges and roads and power plants, and we build military bases, and we have to be able to do something different in those countries, or we're going to lose those countries. He's right. He's right. They're losing those countries because at the end of the day, what people really want is not this kind of war brought to their country. It's the understanding that if you want to prevent war, if you want to prevent chaos, you need a certain level of economic stability to do so. Meaning, yeah, you're going to get people who are terrorists if they don't necessarily believe they have any buy-in to the country and they don't see a future within the country. But if you have roads, bridges, jobs, an economy, this notion of an ability to make some level of life for yourself, you are less inclined to do that. That's just kind of a theory of crime, even in the US. And so it's good to see that let's say, that ecosystem is starting to grow and develop, where Africa is getting this kind of sense of itself, where they're able to kind of look inward to a global Africa. That's fantastic. It's fascinating, because I get this sense that Africa is going to play a pivotal role coming up in whatever this new norm is, where the world is trying to figure out what it's ultimately going to be. From the standpoint of security, I also agree with you on that. If it doesn't matter how smart I am, if you can take my lunch money, my intelligence is not really going to help me. And, the U.S. has zero issue with using terrorists to knock over. It was true, right? It's like the smartest man alive get punched in the nose. It requires a certain level of security, especially considering, you can look at Syria. Syria is a great example. The U.S. had used terrorists, jihadists, in order to try to knock over that government going all the way back since George Bush. And they finally were able to accomplish it out of the blue in order to do so. And there are many African countries that have pointed out they believe that France, the US, are using terrorism to antagonize those countries, to make the government look like it can't do the job of protecting the citizens of that country, and hence Russian security. Give me your take on this notion of Russian security. How is it working? How has it integrated itself into the various countries, specifically the Sahel states?
Well, this is a really important issue, and I think you and I have just sort of put it out very well. There's a definite and absolute balance between regular defense, physical security, sovereign security, where military and defense plays a role, and then economic security as well. You need to balance it out. You can't just move on one end only. And well-balanced, history has told us that governments will manage to do that, or leaders will manage to do that, are more secure and can develop their countries going forward. And has proven it. Russia is now proving it. And people are watching and looking at that. So they're trying to export that. Russia especially is trying to export that into Africa. In fact, an untold story is Russia's move into the Central African Republic about 10 years ago. And people don't know that this is where things really started well. Although Russia has a history with many African countries, but modern recent African history tells us that this is where Russia's moved into with the Wagner Group in the Central African Republic to protect the newly elected president, Touadéra. And then from there, built up a security fence around him and slowly managed to secure him in his position today secured. But of course, people are not quite happy with what he's trying to do. He's trying to bring the French back again. And people say, be careful. But Russia was very successful, and Russia exported that to Mali. And the young president of Mali, Assimi Goïta, saw it and said, I'm going to call up on the Russia and Mali, or at least the former Soviet Union and Mali, had a very long-standing partnership for many, many, many years. And they built up on it, and Mali has been receiving solid security. I'm talking about serious security to protect drones, satellite data, insight and information, early intelligence detection, anticipatory, if you want, surveillance of the terrorists in the northern part of Mali. Remember, Mali is a huge country, about 1 million something square kilometers, same as also Niger. So it's not an easy country to secure, given also not the geography, but also the region, that the Sahel is not an easy place to really police. But they've managed to now have control over the country. And what they're finding, and what we know is, that in fact the northern part of Mali, that bigger chunk of Mali that's next to Algeria, is full of gold and full of oil and gas. Some of the most incredible reserves are there. Deposit first. And so people are now vying and looking at this. Same for Burkina Faso and Niger. And so the secure them physically, you have no gain, but also by securing them, you need to feed your own people, because people are not going to live on, on talks and death, so forth. So you got to do both of them. I think by striking a partnership, a sensible partnership with Russia, I think Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are now finding a way to not only express themselves better, but also attempt to govern the country better, having the security rights, having security also right, but also give a new spirit to the country, which is not easy, because you still have other countries like France still attempting to topple the government, but also feeding, internal division and so forth. I think this is a good partnership to start with. And I think many African countries should follow that model to strengthen the security, defense area, internal securities as well as external. But at the same time, they should also look to China to provide some economic security and trading, to buy cheap goods and then feed the countries, but also feed themselves at home. It's not just depending on the outside. So Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger are just doing just that. An incredible.
I guess my thought is,
incredible.
Yes, I agree with you about the feeding your people, obviously, right? I guess my thought is, though, it requires, maybe in the very beginning, it requires, like you said, the relationships in order to even build the industry, in order to extract the resources, in order to be able to do that going forward. You made one more point before I get to that. You made the point of saying France is stirring up internal divisions in the country. Explain how that works. Like, what are they doing? They're still intruding into the politics of the various Sahel states.
I mean, one simple example, and this is not my words, but the words of the president of Burkina Faso and also Mali, especially Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré has been accusing d'Ivoire, at least the president of Côte d'Ivoire and his government, Alassane Ouattara, of being a proxy to the French. First of all, organizing the sort of dissidents of these two countries and creating refuge for them in the southern part of Côte d'Ivoire. And then with not only money, but strategies, but also disinformation strategies to be able to line the government of these two countries, including Niger, by the way. And so the president, in fact, it was last week again, has been making the same case. Many people, or at least a couple of groups, were caught with billions of French CFA, attempting to corrupt the military to topple President Ibrahim Traoré, and they were caught red-handed, and all of that. And you could see, I mean, the evidence is so clear. Not only they were caught, but also four, what's called the French spying agency, DGSE, were caught in Burkina Faso a year they'd been there. And of course, Ibrahim Traoré and his government didn't want to release them. They were only released because the government of the King of Morocco intervened to really make a case. And in fact, another subject that you and I will get time we should discuss is a growing role of Morocco, not only investment, but security and all sort of industrial stuff in West Africa. And Morocco is becoming a powerful hegemon in that place. So they managed to to release those four spies. And it's not just only those spies. You have groups of terrorists also coming from Côte d'Ivoire, part of Burkina Faso, and attacking the civilians in the southern parts and killing them and then running back to Côte d'Ivoire. But the Burkinabe military and soldiers cannot do anything. So these are the kind of skirmishes and continuous provocations, deep ways to undermine those governments that's playing out. And the French are just sitting and pretending that nothing to do with it. However, In fact, one of the former French generals, retired general, he made it clear many months ago in the middle, I think it was in July or September, that they are now planning a 30-year serious to be back in the former colonies. I mean, that should send a signal to everybody that the French are not just sitting duck. They are doing something. And they're losing big time. If they lose all these countries they used to colonize, France will become nothing.
Cote d'Ivoire, they don't see the writing on the wall themselves. Meaning, is there anything internal to the country that says all of these other countries are throwing off the yoke of French imperialism? Maybe we should do the same thing. I mean, especially if they're seeing there's some kind of economic, financial, industrial, or for that matter, trade relationship benefits that these countries in the Sahel states have received from throwing off the yoke of French oppression, I'm going to call it in that way, or imperialistic control. Why does Cote d'Ivoire do that? I mean, what are they getting out of it? And is there a fervor in the population itself to follow the Sahel states in that effectively overthrowing that control?
Yes, there's a huge population is getting educated. If you pay attention to social media, the wave of awakening is just unbelievable. But they don't have the means to fight a sort of brutal, savage government that pretends to be a democratic, government. Because any dissent is shut down
Immediately.
I mean, you may have seen what happened in I think it was last year. People protested. There were about 300 or more than 300 or 500 people killed because they're protesting against an illegal of the president. Now, the model is not different from other African countries. We have foreign powers who really feed and support and all local people using foreign arms and power. So it's not easy. It's very difficult. That's one of the reasons the success, perhaps also in Chad, is just a great fit as an incredible success, and we have to support
Kofi.
However, there is socially things are not going as well as people pretend, because even with a 7% economic growth, it's not sure that things will go well.
Things are going to go well. Kofi, I'm going to end it here. Kofi Kwaku, he's an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa. Yes, you're breaking up a bit, but no issue. I think we understand that basically it's difficult for Cote d'Ivoire to do that, even though there's a lot of, let's say, a want for something different. It's just difficult considering the practical realities on the ground in regards to how the government responds to it. Kofi, man, I wanted to bring in people who were some of my favorite people to interview to close the year out. You have easily been one of them, and I deeply appreciate you for joining me over the year and today. And I really do thank you. Have a damn good year, man. I wish you all the best. Kofi Kwaku, he's an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg.
Thank you always for having all the best.
Oh, man, you have a good one, man. Enjoy your day. All right. That was a love Kofi, man. The conversation, like I said, very rarely do we get African news in the States. We get news is filtered through various media organizations that they say are coming from Africa, as opposed to talking to someone from the continent to give his take on events. And again, when you read Western media when you had this overthrows in Burkina Faso, in oh, what was the other one? There were three, I believe, like that just went back to back to back. You had, for all intents and purposes, the media in the U.S. freaking out. And when Kofi came on, he kind of explained it. He's like, look, these governments weren't working to the best interests of the population. That's why you had the population so backing the overthrow, the coup. It's like, what is democracy if it's not serving the interests of the public? And that's kind of one of those things. If you have a fig leaf of democracy, where you have a government that is working at the behest of something else, extracting resources out, and the public doesn't necessarily see the benefit of it short of a small cadre of people who are servants of that imperialistic class, then how is that a democracy in any honest sense of the word? And what those governments were trying to do was basically take back power or take power. And, you know, whether they are successful with that, I suppose we're going to see going into the future. ECOWAS seems like a lonely organization at this point, with those states not going back. And they're effectively missing those states and the power of those states. But all things being equal, we're going to see it. And, you know, I get the sense that we're looking at a forward-facing Africa, especially if they get to the point of saying, hey, we are rich, and we will exploit these resources. And we have other countries that would help us exploit these resources in win-win relationships in a way we don't necessarily get that out of imperial powers. So, shout out to him. I deeply appreciate him for coming on. He has been a friend of the show going all the way back to my radio days. I'm saying radio days, like this was something that took place years ago. It was like 2 months ago. No, I appreciate him. And to be specific, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad is not necessarily, they didn't necessarily have an overthrow, but at the very least, you can see him kicking out the French. His main point, really, and he's reinforced this point over and over again, that this is contagious. That when other countries who are sick of this notion of the French intruding into the politics, the French backing terrorists in order to give a sense that the government can't control its security and that the government is somehow weak in that sense, or for that matter, to destabilize the population, that when those countries get sick of it, and they see these states that threw off that yoke, that paid off their bills to the IMF, that worked with China and Russia for either industry or for some kind of, let's say, industries being built in those countries, whatever that kind of win-win relationship is, that other countries also start to say, hey, we can do that too. It's a show by example. It's the reason why examples are so important. Hey, that guy did it, why can't we? It's contagious. That's his point. And if you get that kind of revolutionary thought in all of these countries, and you get these countries exploiting their own resources, hell, maybe even coming up with their own African Union, like a currency or whatever, you get a forward-facing, massively powerful continent. The catch is, can they do it? We'll be here to see, I suppose. Look, we are coming to the end of this show. Before I close this show, there are one or two clips that I really got to get to. One or two clips that I really got to get to. So I showed the Michael Steele one earlier in the day. I have to show this one by Charlie Kirk. I am not a fan of Charlie Kirk by any stretch of the imagination. I think very lowly of him. And the reason I'm showing this clip is because it is funny as hell to me that he's this delusional. Like, flamingly ridiculous in his appraisal of these things. He is shocked that billionaires are looking out for their own interests. I want to repeat that. Charlie Kirk, dunce that he is totally bewildered and shocked that billionaires will look out for the interests of billionaires as opposed to workers. Now, under normal circumstances, when this is cast, people like Charlie Kirk will say, oh, black people are lazy, that's why they're not being hired. Okay, Charlie Kirk, you have two foreigners who are effectively saying you and your people are lazy because they always say it about us. But now you have Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy. Hell, Ramaswamy said the quiet part out loud. These people are lazy, and we need foreigners who are willing to work to do the jobs that these white people who aren't smart enough, capable enough, super engaged enough to do. And Kirk is like, this is not what we voted for. It is exactly what you voted for. The notion that a blue-collar billionaire will sucker you into this idea that he is fighting for workers, I have no idea why you think that. The truth of the matter is, capitalists, in their mindset, their objective is to maximize their cash. And fact of the matter is, and unfortunate to the American worker, is that workers are expensive. If I have to pay somebody $15 an hour, that money is coming out of me and my earnings. If I could pay a kid $1 to clean a toilet, I'd pay a kid $1 to clean a toilet. That's the way they think. That is their point of view. That is the reason why we have child labor laws. That is the reason why we have laws about dumping stuff into the air or into the water, because if a corporation had the opportunity to do it and put that cost on the American public, they would do so. So I'm not sure why it's shocking that when Trump gets in, Musk backing him, Ramaswamy backing him, and they tell Trump, hey, H-1B1s are awesome. Those things are fantastic. And Trump, who himself, on the debate stage, I've used them myself. I think they're great. But now that I'm candidate Trump, and I need to make a pro-American argument in order to get elected, now I don't like them. I think they shouldn't be used. Well, the moment that Trump got elected, what did he come out with in the New York Post the other day? I think H-1B1s are great. He stands by Elon. He stands by Elon. Charlie Kirk is bewildered by that. I want to play this clip.
This is a violation of our social contract. And it sounds good. Let's just let more H-1B workers in. But what about the 23-year-old that went to University of Washington and studied computer science at the UW Computer Science Department? Shouldn't he be given preference above someone who could do the work for far less? It is about priorities, and it's not about what Charlie Kirk wants. It's not about what other people want out there. And I have friends on both sides of this debate. It's very simple. It's what the American people wanted. And the American people overwhelmingly voted for less immigration and the prioritization of the American children and the American worker, not the American oligarch.
Isn't that special? He is now fighting the oligarchs. Charlie Kirk fights the oligarchs. I love that. So when it was talking about DEI, or when it was, oh, these black people are lazy, or when it was that, no issue. Charlie Kirk agrees. Fully agree. When it is somebody saying white people are lazy, we can't find white people to do these jobs. White people aren't smart enough. They aren't talented enough. They aren't engaged enough. Now Charlie Kirk has issues. The fact of the matter is, those programs were used to drive down wages. And again, they're driving down wages for the very explicit point that it maximizes their profit. This isn't magic. This is not something that is super difficult to get your head around. Elon Musk, who himself was an H-1B1 visa person, Ramaswamy, Donald Trump, the various people who are in the position of authority right now, at the very least, the people who are in the ear of Donald Trump, are whispering to him, hey, it is a good thing for our class to bring in more of those workers, despite the fact that the program is being abused. As I pointed out before, there may be a gap that exists in the context of the H-1B1 program, meaning the number of people who we need to do various jobs. And there may be some gap where we can't necessarily meet in this country. And that may be the case for nursing, that may be the case for H-1B1 in regards to tech workers in general, right? I don't know what that number is. I do know that the number of those visas have exploded. I do know that Ramaswamy and his ilk, meaning the Donald Trump team, are talking about getting rid of the Department of Education. So this idea that A, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, and B, Americans are dumb, and so they can't do those jobs, is fundamental magical thinking. It's one thing if Charlie Kirk and the other Republicans say, I believe in America, as you heard him say right there, I believe in America, I believe in backing American workers, I believe in doing what's best for the American interests. I would argue you do not. You care about the country in the abstract. I care about the country as individuals who make up that country. Healthcare to ensure that Americans live longer. I don't care about their race. Healthcare to ensure that Americans live longer is a pro-American position. Education to ensure that this issue of H-1B1 visas doesn't necessarily need to exist in the way that it currently exists, if it indeed it exists at all. An education system that prioritizes Americans ensuring that they go to college, or at the very least, give them the opportunity to go to college. And if they get an advanced degree, God bless them, we back it, we pay for it, and we put our resources behind Americans going to school, Americans going to college, Americans getting advanced degrees. That is a pro-American position. This other notion of getting rid of the Department of Education is fundamental magical thinking. If indeed you're taking this position that we should have enough Americans to fill those slots and fill those roles. How stupid can you be to believe that backing billionaires is somehow going to work out in the interests of workers, when the interests of workers oftentimes conflicts with the interests of billionaires? After all, when somebody wants a minimum wage increase, who's paying that minimum wage increase? And if you go to your politicians and say, hey, we should fight for a minimum wage increase, even on the Democratic side, you will probably not get that, because all of them gets money from the exact same people, meaning they're getting money from people with means. The same people of means that just won that election, that is apparently going to expand the H-1B1 visa program against this kind of context of MAGA. How stupid can you be? How stupid can you be? You're now claiming that this is not what you're voting for. And from my point of view, this is exactly what you voted for. You wanted a billionaire, you got your billionaire. That billionaire gets in office and does billionaire things, and you're shocked by the fact that that billionaire is doing billionaire things. Why are you shocked that a billionaire is going to look out for the interests of billionaires? That is the part that is shocking to me, that you're shocked at all. Look, I mean, and to be fair to Donald Trump, when he was in the first time, apparently he was more strict on the H-1B1 visa program. It's also fair to say that Donald Trump has a habit of listening to the last person in his ear. And right now, he is buddy-buddy with Elon. He had no issue with the H-1B1 visa program when he himself was running his companies. He wanted to, get cheap labor for his own companies and his own corporation. He used it himself because why? He was maximizing his profit by bringing in people who he could pay less than a typical American worker. Elon does the same thing prolifically. I would imagine, I don't know what Vivek does, but if Vivek had the opportunity, he would do the exact same thing. If a company could maximize their profit by putting in a machine for a nickel less than the worker that is flipping their hamburger, they would do it. It would be fiscally sensible from their point of view. If they can ship a job abroad in order to avoid paying the American worker a decent wage, they will do that. It's fiscally responsible for them to do that, meaning it is in their vested interest to do that. So they do that. It is the reason why jobs get shipped overseas in the first place. It is what they do. If they can push for legislation or pay politicians in order to keep wages low, they will do that. It's in their interests to do so. I hope you get my point. If cheap labor can be bought from abroad, meaning from South America and all of these other countries illegally, and they can use it and get away with it. Many of them do. They would do that because it is in their interest to do that. I hope you get the theme that I'm trying to make here. Companies, capitalists, they do what is in their fiscal best interest. It is not about what is in the interest of the country. It is not about what is in the interest of America in this kind of esoteric sense. It is what is their explicit self-interest. Vulgar, radical self-interest. That's the way it works. That is the name of the game. I am unsure why Charlie Kirk was completely unaware of that. You put a capitalist in office, that capitalist has sided and surrounded himself with other capitalists, and he has decided this program is great. This program is great. I mean, this is the case across the board, right? I mean, we were just talking with Caleb Maupin about Luigi potentially being the guy that murdered the CEO of the company. Why did he murder the CEO? Or at the very least, why are people cheering the fact that he murdered the CEO? They're cheering the fact because for them and everybody else, most people have to deal with healthcare insurance companies. And they know the mandate of healthcare insurance companies are the same mandate for any other corporation or any other company. How do I make as much money as possible? All right. It's just so happened that their business model is denying care to maximize their profit. Meaning, you got cancer, you got some kind of ailment, you got, you broke a limb, you got a limb cut off. Sad day for you. If we can find a way to deny you care in some particular form or fashion or drop the cost of that care, we will do so. I don't care that you're in pain. I don't care that you're missing a limb or that you have some kind of ailment that your doctor wants to give some kind of medication for. We don't care. We need to cut our profits. Full stop. It's the same modus operandi with hiring workers, or for that matter, trying to pay workers less. For them, it's a balance sheet. That's it. It's not about your friends. It's not about doing what's in America's best interests. It's not about this is a good thing to do for the economy of the United. It's not about any of that. Why is Charlie Kirk confused? Is my question. And why is he somehow shocked that a businessman would do things in the best interest of other businessmen? It's the way he look at the world. It is comical to me. Now, Bannon has argued that they're going to war on this issue. Okay, fair enough. You're going to war on the issue. Let's see where it gets you. Reality of it is, Trump has won. He's in office. This is his last 4 years. He is impervious to anything that you do and probably could care less. Now, he says he's going to, accomplish the objectives that he put forward when he ran in the race. Okay, he may or may not do that. I'm not even sure H-1B1 visas even came up in regards to the dialogue of the election, because how could it come up? It wasn't in the primaries because Donald Trump didn't participate in the primaries. It didn't come up in the debates because Donald Trump only participated in 2 debates. So it wasn't even like you could vet the candidate in order to figure out what the candidate was going to do going into office. So you're having this fight after the fact. And you're coming to this kind of awareness after the fact that corporate people do corporate people things and look out for the interests of the corporations, because it's the way they think. It's in their brain trust. It's what he's accustomed to. It's the way he's ran his business as a businessman. And of course, when a businessman get into Congress, it's not as the White House. It's not like I am in the White House now, and my point of view and framing of the world has magically changed. It's not that. It's not that. I would have more sympathy for Kirk if he was on the left. I would have more sympathy for Kirk if he was an actual populist. My sympathies are not there. You're a sucker. You voted for this. This is your bed. Lie in it. And now you have to kind of shield to your audience about how this is not what we voted for. It is exactly what you voted for. It is exactly what you voted for. Let's see. Is there anything else? I think there was one more video that I had to hit before I close this out. Yes, there was. There was. In fact, there might be 2. So, there was the fight for one of the committee seats that AOC was running against Jerry Connolly with. I think I might have said that a little bit wrong grammatically, but we'll just go with it. And in that committee fight, AOC lost. AOC lost that fight. And you got Jen Psaki effectively saying, well, they made somewhat of a mistake here. I mean, we actually lost a presidential election. Maybe we need to do something different. Okay, fair enough. Maybe you need to do something different. They decided they didn't need to do anything different. And so they're going to keep this boat rocking. I want you to hear the reason, though, that Connolly, a man with cancer in his 70s, was selected over AOC. Listen to what he says as his rationale for being the best choice for this position. Again, an old man riddled with cancer. And I'm not saying that a person who is ill or something like that shouldn't be able to get a various position. I do believe that they should be able to get positions. If you can do the job, you should be able to get the position. I don't necessarily care about the health in normal circumstances, meaning in normal companies and the way that the company operates. If the person can do the job, let the person do the job. And based on our own laws in this country, if you need to make accommodations for a person to be able to do that job, fair enough. By the same token, you're not going to have a blind person driving a car. And you're putting somebody in office after Joe Biden, who, decrepit as he was, evaporated before our very eyes in that position as president, where they hid how bad he actually was for 4 years. Meaning they knew from the very beginning that Joe Biden was not in his right mind. He was decaying before our very eyes. The American public saw it. And the American public was aghast by it. They lied to us over and over and over again about Joe Biden's capability of doing that job. And then they lost to another 70-something-year-old. Okay, fair enough. So are you going to do something different now that you are in a new world with Donald Trump as president of the United States? Or are you going to keep doing the same thing? We've had people literally die on the Supreme Court bench. What is her name? The woman, Feinstein, died in office for all intents and purposes. The woman could barely stand up and yet was still making votes. In fact, she had a power of attorney in charge and was still in Congress. I hope you get my point. This is the Democratic Party. Great example of the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi is what, like 81 years old, mama bear? Yes, she's still kicking and everything else, but I'm making the point that this party seems to miss the point. Listen to what he says, because he's making the argument that it's my turn. I haven't had a committee seat before. It's my turn. And I can do the job, and I can do the job well. Dude, it's not about your turn. It really is about who's the most effective to do that job. And this is the same guy that pointed out, oh, these people are bloviating and making speeches. That is part of your job. That is part of your job. And the level of vigor that you can add to that role is important. And by the way, this is not me rah-rahing the Democrats. They're not going to get my vote one way or the other. It's just trying to make a point. We should have seen with Joe Biden in that office that these political positions require a certain amount of energy, dynamism, flexibility, and an ability to communicate with a larger part of the public and to do so in a way that is effective. And whatever you want to think about AOC, she is, young. She does social media outreach in a way that Connolly, I can't believe a 71-year-old would ever be able to match or to even equal. AOC has kissed the ass of every Democrat and has become a good little soldier. And even then, they still don't trust her. And instead, they put this guy into the position. Listen to what he said. It's my turn. It is my turn.
The decision about leadership ought to always be based on a proven record, skill set, competence, capability, and your plan for moving forward. I've never had my chance to be a ranking member or chairman of a full committee. This is it. And I've got the bona fides and the credentials over 16 years that my colleagues, looked at, examined, validated, and decided that's what we need. We need the best general we can put on the battleground with 4 more years perspective.
And you really think that's you? With your body riddled with cancer, with you in your 70s, you really think that the best person for this is you? And again, this is not me cancer shaming. I'm just pointing out that positions require an energy that I don't think that a 71-year-old full of cancer can match. And I think the first part is the part that's even worse, because he said, I've never had this seat before. It's about seniority. It's not about, they didn't choose him because they thought he was the best. They chose him because of seniority. And I would add in, probably, he is part of what the Democratic Party is. He is part of a trusted aspect of the Democratic Party in a way that AOC is not. And so that is the guy that we're going to put into that position. Again, I think you're missing the boat. And, if you're looking for a party to change after losing on a massive effing level, it doesn't seem like they got the memo or the message at all. And, Simone Sanders, again, I nearly fell out the chair when she made that argument about we need a workers' movement. Get the F out of here. But, even in that, it's kind of in a sandbox. It's echo chamber stuff that's just coming out of nowhere because they're trying to figure out how to message as opposed to actually change in real earnest terms. It's one thing to say that we've gotten our messaging wrong. We've gotten our the way we talk to people wrong. That's one thing. It's another thing to change. Changing is different. Connolly is an example of status quo is normal. Status quo is normal. I don't get the sense that they believe that they actually need to change all that much. I get the sense that they think that this is purely a messaging issue, and that the reason that the public dislikes them so and distrusts them so to the point of putting in a blue-collar billionaire is that they just messaged wrong. We need to go on Joe Rogan more. We need to talk to the media more. We need to do more of the way we talk to people. It's not that. It's your brand. And the American public is correct in their appraisal of that brand as being somewhat problematic. You already have a Republican Party in this country. You don't need to. You don't need to. And to make this point even clearer, this. So Democrats actually got to the point of saying, the problem is we need to coordinate our super PACs. That the Republican Party did a great job in organizing their super PACs in a way for maximal effort and maximum damage. And we ourselves also, as Democrats, need to come together and do something similar with our super PACs in order to give us a better chance to win. This is so deeply ridiculous because it misses the point. And what I mean by misses the point, if you are running as a left-wing, ostensibly left-wing political party, and as a left-wing party, you're supposed to be this kind of release valve to the capitalistic system. Okay, fair enough. Accept the premise. How do you do that? Now, all things being equal, a release valve in this sense is medical bills are too high. Yeah. In this sense, medical bills are too high. College is too high. Dental should be included with Medicare. It's not. And you go down the list of ills. We need an increase in minimum wage. Basically, how do we make life for the citizenry easier, simpler, to help them self-actualize? How do we make the best American, that we can possibly make from the standpoint of education, healthcare education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do we make those things available and affordable to the masses of the American public? The rich is going to have those things. They don't necessarily need the money for that stuff. Everybody else does. How do we do that as a political party that is the lifeblood of what it's supposed to mean to be a Democrat, at the very least, that was set by FDR back during that era? All right. So how do you do that if you're taking massive amounts of money? Meaning, if you're going to raise $1.5 billion from super rich, where you have all these billionaires, billionaire row, do they really care about those things since they already have those things? And if you're going to do that as a political party, especially as a political party on the left, how can you ever get anything real done? I hope you get my point. How do you really take $1.5 billion and then turn around and say, by the way, now we need to increase taxes. We need to put a tax on, I don't know, something in order to get some kind of revenue. We need to try to pay down the budget also while we're doing this. Meaning, how do you do all of that knowing full well that you're only really going to get the money from where the money is stationed? How do you do that? Will the rich give you $1.5 billion to do that? And is that part of the reason that Kamala Harris went running around with Liz Cheney, believing that money would ultimately be the final say, one way or the other? Now, Kamala Harris might have thought that because if she was running in Congress, 90% of those races are won by the side with the most cash. The presidency is not Congress. The amount of publicity that you're going to get just by being in the race, if you're a Democrat or Republican, is going to be worth several $1 million in and of itself. And if you're Donald Trump, all eyes on Trump. It's the way it worked. It's the way it came out. Donald Trump made a hell of a lot less, like 3 times less than Kamala Harris, and still won that race. Kamala Harris ended up in debt, despite the fact that she got $1.5 billion and spent $1.5 billion in 3 months. They've come to the conclusion, you know what the issue is? We need to get our super PACs to better spend money and more organized in the way that they spend money. That's the thought, that's the assessment that Psaki and her guest has come to. Mark,
I'll ask you about something that David Plouffe said on Pod Save America, someone you and I both know. He said, quote, "We have to stop playing a different game as it relates to super PACs than Republicans. They coordinate more than we do. I'm just sick and tired of it." And he was talking about kind of legal advisors saying to the DNC and others, you can't coordinate at all with super PACs while Republicans are doing that. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that observation. And that's what I've heard as well, talking to people, both lawyers and also people within the DNC. We need to make greater use of the flexibilities, not to do things illegally, but we need to be making greater use of the flexibilities in the law, especially for moving money around, spending dollars appropriately.
So wait. You accept that there's not supposed to be coordination between the super PAC and the candidate, right? Money is speech, providing that you're not coordinating. By the way, they still coordinate whether you're Democrat or Republican. When a person comes out and says, yeah, I think we're going in this direction, it doesn't take much for the super PAC to watch it on television to see that a campaign is going in a certain direction and go in a direction with a candidate. That's not all that difficult in the world. That is coordination, whether they are talking or not. I'm not even sure that anybody could prove that a particular candidate is talking or not talking to a political super PAC. So there's also that. It seems that their assessment is we need to go into the gray area more. That's what we need to do as Democrats. Get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. Your solution to failing miserably with 8 million people, just say it, screw it, is the issue is that we need to, be more in the gray area of legalities around the whole notion of super PACs. That's what we need to do as Democrats, because we're the most moral of the parties. And because we're the most moral of the parties, we don't do the stuff that Republicans do in regards to super PACs. And so maybe we need to start. That's your conclusion. That's your conclusion. To be semi-illegal in your operations with super PACs. You lost 8 million voters. You lost a lot of blacks, meaning especially black men. I think Trump got like 25%. You lost Hispanics. I think Trump got like nearly, 47, 48%. If I'm not mistaken, you even lost white women. And the youth vote, many of which stayed home. You lost the Arab vote. And your thought process, the best idea that you can come up with to reconcile this is we need to do illegal stuff or quasi illegal stuff with super PACs. That's our ticket. That's what we need to do. That's a great idea. Why didn't we think of that before? So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the party. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the message. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the way people view you and see you in the bubble to which you currently and obviously exist. Kamala Harris ran a flawless campaign. Even Queen Latifah was there, and Queen Latifah doesn't give votes to anybody or doesn't get accolades to anybody. So obviously, if Queen Latifah backed it, according to Joanne Reed, it was clearly spotless. So no, we're blameless. We're flawless. All things being equal. Those Hispanic men were just racist and bigoted and sexist. Those black men were sexist. Those youth vote were mad about genocide and they don't know their history. Nope. We're the most moral and we're great. And people like us. Again, I think you're coming to the wrong conclusions. There's something fundamentally wrong with your party. And the fact that you even have that conversation with yourself, as opposed to having a genuine and actual autopsy, even gets across to me more that that problem is more deeply ingrained than even I thought it was prior. It is a party that is impotent, that is missing a penis, that just doesn't work for anybody. You can't get anything done. And not just get anything done, you can't even win. Just saying. I mean, just outrageous that this is the conclusions that they've come up with after losing millions of people who decided to just not show up because they were that disgusted with the political space. You had a candidate running around the country with Liz effing Cheney. Let's put that in perspective. And you see nothing wrong with the party that is purely reactive and reflexive to whatever the Republican Party is doing. If Donald Trump likes dogs, then the Democratic Party prefers cats. If Donald Trump likes ding-dongs, then the Democratic Party likes ho-hos. Meaning, is there any real core? Is there any real standard to what it means to be a Democrat? And I go back to what I said before. When they ask the question, what does the Democratic Party stand for? I have zero answer for it, especially not a real answer for it that will be appeasing to the ears of Democrats. I understand they have this great sense of themselves when they look in the mirror. Other people are not seeing that. You're in a bubble. I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. I want to thank all of you for joining me today and honestly over the course of this year. And I want you guys to have a fantastic new year, fantastic year. I will be here with you for as long as the powers of this body allows me to be here with you, doing the news, covering the news. And I hope you stay with me. I want to thank all of my new members, by the way. I think I have about 24 at this point. Thomas family is growing. I put a poll, by the way, as a post. Give me your take. I'm very curious of what the audience thinks. I am looking for ways to raise extra revenue. I will do t-shirts and stuff like that. I just haven't necessarily found a picture that I liked. I've added a few shirts, but I don't love them. I may have to get a designer to do work on it. But that to the side for the moment. That's something that normal channels or other channels do. Chess lessons. That was the other thing. And the other thing was chess games. So if you're a member and you want to do chess send me an email and we'll get a Blitz game in. I think one of the things I put on the membership thing was Blitz during chess nights, where I would offer game to members. What I'm also thinking about, though, is people who are non-members who wants to get games in, do like a $3, $2, I'm not wed to the cost or to the amount, Blitz game to be shown on Blitz nights, where you basically effectively challenge the champ with $2 or $3 super chats or stickers, I suppose, to equal to a game. That's my thought. I'll put a poll in to get your take and to get the audience take on that. I'm uncertain. And when I'm uncertain, I might as well just ask the audience. You guys are there. Might as well get your point of view. I'm going to end this. I want to thank all of you for joining me. This is the last show of the year. I think episode 68. I appreciate it. You guys have a fantastic and phenomenal morning. And I will see you guys, may even see you tonight. I'm thinking about doing a nighttime, bringing in the New Year show. I'll see how I feel. But you guys have a fantastic day. And thank you all. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, the last one for the year. Signing off. Have a good one all.